The desert bled red. Chayton Greyhawk sat his horse, a dark shape against a sky dissolving into copper and violet. He was a man of two worlds, and at home in neither. Here, under the immense, bruised twilight of the New Mexico territory, he was just a man, alone. His gaze was fixed on a paint mare, a wild thing of white and brown, its mane a tangle of freedom. He had tracked her for 2 days, not for bounty, but for the quiet challenge of the chase. He nudged his mount forward, a slow, patient walk. The mare's head snapped up, ears pricked. She snorted, testing the air, her dark eyes reflecting the last sliver of sun. Chayton kept his body loose, his hands light on the reins. He was part of the landscape, another shadow moving in the dusk. He could have pushed her, run her to exhaustion, roped her and broken her spirit for a handful of dollars. He had done it before, too many times. The mare watched him. He tracked her movements, the ripple of muscle over her flank, the nervous stamp of her hoof. He was close now, perhaps 50 yards. He could feel the pulse of her fear. He had a lariat coiled and ready at his saddle. His hands knew the weight of it, the pull and bite of it. His memory knew the feeling of a life struggling against his will. He saw the moment she would bolt. He saw the path she would take, a narrow cut between 2 rising monoliths of sandstone. He could head her off, turn her back into the open basin. He could own her. Instead, Chayton Greyhawk pulled his horse to a stop. He raised one hand, open, palm forward, a gesture of peace, a gesture of surrender. The mare stared, confused by the lack of pursuit. "Go," he said. His voice was rough, quiet, lost almost immediately in the vast emptiness. "Hozo, go in peace." She took a hesitant step back, then another, with a defiant toss of her head. She spun on her haunches and bolted. Her hooves threw up clouds of red dust, golden in the last light, as she disappeared into the cut. Chayton watched her go, his chest tight. He watched until the sound of her flight was gone, replaced by the whisper of the wind over the sagebrush. He had been a hunter. He had been a tracker for the blue-coated soldiers. He had led them. The memory came unwanted, as it always did. It rose with the smell of the cooling sand. It was not the crisp, clean scent of sage, but the greasy, choking smell of pinon pine burning when it should not. The high, thin wail of a child. He was riding point, his eyes on the ground, reading the story of a small band of Apache moving through the high canyons. He was the best. His skill was a thing of pride. Once, then he led the soldiers to the village. It was not a war camp. It was a home. He saw the flames catch the dry thatch of the hogans. He heard the sudden, sharp cracks of the cavalry carbines. He saw the women running, clutching babies, their faces masks of terror. He had sat his horse on the ridge, just as he did now, watching. A captain, his face red with the sun and whiskey, had clapped him on the shoulder. "Good work, Greyhawk. Damned good work." Chayton had looked down at the silver dollars pressed into his hand. They were heavy. They felt like stones. He felt the bile rise in his throat. He was dying. Yet he had led the soldiers. He was a man paid to hunt people who looked like his own mother. He was a victim of their expansion. And he was their most useful tool. He was a traitor. He closed his eyes, the red of the memory mixing with the red of the sunset. He turned his horse south, toward the distant, flickering lights of Las Piedras. He was done hunting things that wanted only to be free. But a man had to eat, and the ghosts of his past demanded a high price, a price he could only pay by buying back the land, the horses, the piece of his soul he had sold. Far to the east, in a world of gaslight and paved streets, there was no red dust. There was only the suffocating scent of expensive perfume and old money. Eleanor Ward sat on a silk settee in her father's Boston drawing room. Her dress was the color of cream, its whalebone corset a polite prison against her ribs. She held a porcelain cup of tea she did not want. Her hands, pale and smooth, were perfectly still. Across the room, her father, Senator Ward, swirled brandy in a crystal glass. He was a man whose voice could command a Senate floor, but here, in his own home, it was oiled with accommodation. The merger is, of course, the primary concern. Silas, her father was saying. The rail line through the New Mexico territory is vital. Your access to those silver mines hinges on it. Silas Kane smiled. It was a thin, precise expression that never reached his cold, gray eyes. He was not a handsome man, but he commanded attention. He was dressed in black broadcloth, severe and expensive. He looked less like a businessman and more like an undertaker who had found great success. The mines are a certainty. Senator, Kane said, his voice a low rumble. But certainty requires stability, political stability, domestic stability. Our interests must be aligned, publicly and privately. He turned his gaze to Eleanor. It was not a glance. It was an appraisal. Like a man judging horseflesh, a marriage between our families provides that alignment. It is a strategic bond. Eleanor felt the corset tighten. A strategic bond, a merger. She was a line item in a contract. She looked at her father, pleading silently. He would not meet her eyes. He was looking at the future, at the power Kane's railroad and Kane's money could bring him. Eleanor understands her duty, Senator Ward said quickly, taking a sip of his brandy. She is a good daughter. Kane set his empty glass down with a heavy click. He rose from his chair, a tall, imposing shadow. I am glad to hear it. Perhaps Miss Ward and I could have a moment alone to discuss our shared future. It was not a request. Her father nodded, his smile strained. Of course, of course. Eleanor, show Mr. Kane to the library. Eleanor stood, the silk of her dress rustling. She felt cold. She led the way across the thick carpets, her stomach a knot of ice. The library was dark, smelling of old leather and furniture polish. She turned to face him, her hands clasped in front of her. Mr. Kane, He moved faster than she expected. His hands shot out and gripped her chin, forcing her head up. His thumb pressed painfully against her jaw. You will call me Silas, he whispered. His breath was sour, smelling of brandy and cigars. You have been quiet all evening, my dear. It is unbecoming. A wife should be attentive. You are not my husband, she choked out, trying to pull away. His grip tightened, a technicality. You belong to me. Eleanor, your father has seen to that. You are his asset, and soon you will be mine. He lowered his face to hers. She turned her head, and his mouth landed wet and hard on her cheek. No, she gasped, pushing at his chest. It was like pushing against a stone wall. No, his other hand came up, not to her waist, but to her throat. It did not squeeze hard. Not yet. It was a warning, a casual display of ownership. His fingers were cold against her skin. You will learn to be obedient. You will learn to please me. He forced his mouth onto hers. It was a violation, brutal and cold. She tasted nothing but his power, his contempt. She clawed at his hand, her nails scraping his starched collar. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound, and shoved her away. She stumbled back, crashing into a heavy desk, her breath ragged. She raised a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. That is your first lesson, my dear, Silas Kane said, calmly adjusting his cuffs. There will be more. I expect you to learn them quickly. He turned and walked out of the library, leaving her trembling in the dark. She did not scream. She did not cry. She stood frozen, the imprint of his fingers on her throat, the taste of him in her mouth. She knew, with chilling certainty, that no one would believe her. She was a woman. He was Silas Kane. She was hysterical. He was a pillar of industry. Her father would call it a misunderstanding. He would tell her to be grateful. Later that night, long after the house had fallen silent, Eleanor sat in the hallway outside her father's study. The door was open with just a crack. She was supposed to be in her room, sleeping the sleep of a dutiful daughter. Instead, she was listening. "She is spirited," her father was saying, his voice low and worried. "She is a child who needs a firm hand," Kane's voice replied. "Cold as steel. And I have one. Do not worry about your daughter. Senator, worry about the charter. The railroad must go through that canyon. The silver is there. I can smell it. But the Navajo treaties, the cost. Treaties are suggestions, and the cost is irrelevant. We will get the land. And if your daughter proves difficult, there are ways to manage a disobedient wife. There are private sanitariums. There are doctors who understand the unfortunate frailties of the female mind. She will not be a problem for us, I assure you. A pawn, a con, a bargaining chip to be traded for a silver mine. A difficult girl to be locked away if she did not comply." Eleanor backed away from the door, her stockinged feet silent on the thick runner. She moved down the hall, back to her room. But she was no longer the same person who had walked out of it. The terror from the library had not faded. It had hardened. It had turned into a cold, sharp blade of resolve. She locked her door. She looked at her reflection in the tall mirror, the pale girl in the white nightgown, her eyes wide and dark. She saw the faint, ugly red marks on her throat. She would not be managed. She would not be locked away. She worked with a frantic, silent energy. She pulled a pair of shears from her sewing box. She gathered her long, blonde hair in one hand, the hair her mother had always called her crowning glory. She did not hesitate. She cut. The sound of the blade shearing through the thick tresses was loud in the silence. She watched her hair fall to the floor in heavy, pale clumps. She hacked at it until it was a short, jagged mess. She went to the servants' quarters, to a storage chest where the stable boy kept his spare clothes. She stole a pair of rough canvas trousers, a loose linen shirt, a worn jacket, and a floppy-brimmed hat. They smelled of sweat and horses. She put them on. They were too large, but they hid her shape. She bound her chest with a strip of linen, the constriction almost as tight as Kane's grasp. But this was a prison of her own making. She returned to her father's study. The men were gone. On the desk, left carelessly behind by Kane, was a leather-bound book, a ledger. She had seen him writing in it earlier. She did not know why, but she knew it was important. She took it. She also took a map of the territories from the wall, and all the cash she could find in her father's drawer, perhaps $40 or $50. One last thing. She looked at the white silk wedding dress, hanging like a ghost in her wardrobe, a dress for her own funeral. She tore a strip of lace from its hem and shoved it into her pocket, a reminder of what she was running from. She did not go out the front door. She climbed out her window, dropped 10 feet to the soft grass of the garden, and ran. She did not look back. 2 days later, she was Leo Morales, a quiet Mexican boy with haunted eyes, sitting in the corner of a rattling stagecoach heading west from Omaha. The coach was packed with 5 other men. 2 were miners, thick-handed and loud, smelling of whiskey. 1 was a gambler, his clothes flashy, his eyes always moving. The other 2 were cowboys, lean and weathered, their talk filled with casual profanities and crude jokes about women in saloons. "And I tell her," one of the cowboys laughed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice out the open window, "for $2, I expect more than a pretty face." The others guffawed. Eleanor, now Leo, pulled her hat lower over her eyes. She kept her shoulders slumped, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. She had learned in the first hour to keep her mouth shut, to grunt instead of speak, to make her few words low and rough. Every moment was a performance. Every glance from the other passengers felt like a blade. At night, when the coach stopped at a dirty way station, she would wait until everyone was asleep, clutching a small knife in her hand, her back against a wall, her body shaking so hard she thought her teeth would chatter. She was terrified, but she was free. The world changed with every mile. The lush green of the east gave way to endless, rolling plains of dry grass. Then the plains gave way to something else entirely. Red dust coated everything. It got into her clothes, her mouth, her lungs. The sky was bigger than she had ever imagined. A relentless, piercing blue. The mountains rose in the distance, not green and gentle, but sharp, violet shadows that looked like the teeth of a saw. They passed silent, watchful groups of native people, their faces grim, their clothes a mix of traditional skins and tattered army blankets. They looked at the stagecoach with an emptiness that scared her more than the cowboys' lewd jokes. She saw soldiers on horseback, their rifles held ready. She saw new telegraph poles, raw yellow pine, stretching out across the emptiness, a thin wire connecting this savage world back to the one she had fled. This was the West. It was vast, brutal, and indifferent. It did not care who she was, only if she was strong enough to survive. Silas Kane had already claimed the largest table at the back of the Las Piedras Cantina. The space around him was a vacuum, the other patrons keeping their distance, as if his cold ambition chilled the very air. Chayton Greyhawk had finished his walk from the street, his eyes adjusting to the thick yellow light and the haze of tobacco smoke. He had known Kane was trouble from the moment he laid eyes on him. He was the kind of man who believed the world was his to purchase, and what he could not purchase, he would take. Kane did not rise. He motioned to the empty chair opposite him. Marshal Pike stood near Kane's shoulder, a bulky, sweating shadow in his dusty vest, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol. Pike was bought. It was plain on his face, in the way his eyes avoided looking directly at his new master. "You are Greyhawk," Kane stated. It was not a question. He pushed the heavy leather pouch across the scarred wood of the table. It made a solid, rich sound. 100 gold eagles, a significant sum for a man of your background. Chayton remained standing. He looked at the pouch, then at Kane. The contempt was thick in the man's voice, an easy assumption of superiority that Chayton had felt from white men his entire life. It was the voice of the Indian agents who stole rations, the voice of the cavalry captains who promised peace and delivered bullets. For what Chayton asked, his voice was low, betraying no emotion. "For a job," Kane said, leaning forward. His gray eyes were flat, like chips of slate. "A thief, a young Mexican boy calling himself Leo Morales. He stole a valuable horse of mine, a black stallion named Raven. More importantly, he stole a personal item, a leather ledger. I want it back, and I want the boy." "You want him caught?" Chayton said. "I want him brought back here," Kane clarified, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Alive. I do not pay for corpses unless I order them. I want him to face justice. My justice." Chayton felt the familiar tightening in his gut. The gold on the table was more money than he had seen in 3 years. It was enough to buy the grazing rights to the canyon lands his people had been pushed from. It was enough to buy horses, decent seed, and blankets for the winter. It was a ransom for their survival. And all it cost was his pride. All it cost was hunting another desperate soul. "He is just a boy?" Chayton asked. "A common horse thief," Marshal Pike interjected, his voice overly loud. "A slippery piece of trash. He is nothing." Chayton's gaze shifted to the marshal. "If he is nothing, you should have no trouble catching him yourself." Pike's face flushed a dull red. "We do not have time for this. Greyhawk, are you in or out?" "I work alone," Chayton said, his eyes returning to Kane. "No marshal, no posse. I find him. I bring him back. The horse, the book, the boy, but I do it my way." Kane smiled, a thin, reptilian movement of his lips. "I admire efficiency. I do not care how you do it. As long as it is done, take the money." Chayton reached out, his hand steady, and took the pouch. The weight of it was substantial. It felt like a stone pulling him down. He turned to leave, the gold heavy in his pocket. "One more thing," Marshal Pike called after him, his tone laced with a cheap authority. "Do not let any of your Indian feelings get in the way. This is not about honor. It is about a crime. He is just a lowly horse thief. Understand? Do not get soft." Chayton paused at the doorway, his back to the room. The marshal's words pricked at the old wound, the one that never healed, the conflict of his blood. He was dying, but he had worn the blue uniform. He was a tracker, but he had hunted his own kind. Pike saw him as a tool, a savage with a single, useful skill. Kane saw him as a commodity, cheaper than a white man, but more effective, and the gold in his pocket confirmed they were right. He said nothing. He pushed through the swinging doors and stepped out into the clean, cold dark of the desert night. Hundreds of miles away, the stagecoach rattled and swayed, a wooden box of misery suspended on leather straps. Eleanor Ward. Now Leo Morales sat crammed between a foul-smelling miner and the sharp elbow of a gambler. Her body ached from 3 days of constant, jarring motion. Her disguise was holding, but it was a fragile thing. She had learned to slump, to keep her gaze fixed on the floorboards, to make her voice a low, monosyllabic grunt. She had learned other things, too. She had learned to ignore the stench of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, and chewing tobacco. She had learned to listen to the men's talk, a rough river of boasts, complaints, and crude fantasies. It was an education she had never sought. She had even learned to swear. The first time one of the cowboys, a lean man named Shorty, had jostled her, asking what a little scrap like him was doing heading to the territories. She had frozen. She remembered Silas Kane's cold breath, his hand on her throat. Then she remembered the sound of the stable hands back in Boston, the words they used when they thought no one of quality was listening. "Looking for work," she mumbled, her voice cracking. "Work," Shorty laughed. "He cannot weigh more than 100 pounds soaking wet. What kind of work?" She took a breath, summoning an anger she did not know she possessed. "None of your damn business, mister." The coach went silent. The miner paused, a piece of jerky halfway to his mouth. Shorty stared at her, his eyes narrowing. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought she'd gone too far. Then, the gambler chuckled. Shorty broke into a wide, gap-toothed grin. "Got some sand in him, did he?" Shorty slapped his own knee. "All right, Leo, you keep that sand. You will need it." After that, they mostly left her alone. But the performance was exhausting. It was the nights that were the worst, when the coach stopped at a desolate way station, a miserable shack of mud and wood. She would not sleep. She would sit with her back to a wall, her hat pulled low, her hand clutching the small, sharp knife in her pocket. She would listen to the men snore and mutter, the sounds of coyotes crying in the dark, the wind whistling through the cracks in the wall. In those long, terrified hours, her hand would creep to the oilcloth satchel at her feet. Inside, wrapped in her old shirt, was a bundle of white silk and lace, the wedding dress. She would grip the fabric through the cloth, a tangible reminder of the prison she had fled. It was the ghost of the life Silas Kane had planned for her. She was running from that ghost, running toward an unknown, terrifying freedom. On the 4th day, as the sun began to dip toward the jagged western horizon, the coach was climbing a steep, rocky pass. The air was hot and still. Suddenly, a rifle shot cracked, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. A bullet tore through the canvas roof of the coach. "Hell," the driver yelled from outside. "Ambush!" The coach jolted to a violent stop, throwing the passengers against each other. Eleanor's head struck the wooden frame. Before she could recover, the door was ripped open. A man with a dirty red bandana over his face leered in, brandishing a long-barreled pistol. "Everybody out now, hands high." 2 other men, also masked, were covering the driver and the guard. The passengers scrambled out, their hands raised, The gambler looked annoyed. The miner looked terrified. "Wallets on the ground," the masked man ordered. "Jewelry, anything of value, and the mail sack." The lead robber stalked down the line of passengers, kicking at their meager belongings. He stopped in front of Eleanor. He was breathing hard, his eyes raking over her small frame. "Well, what have we here?" he sneered. "Just a boy. Empty your pockets, boy." Eleanor's hand was shaking so badly she could barely function. She pulled out the small handful of coins her father had left in his desk. It was barely $5. The man backhanded her. The force of the blow sent her sprawling into the red dust. Her hat flew off, revealing her short, hacked hair. "That is it," he roared. "You think you can cheat me?" He raised his pistol, aiming it at her head. "I ought to plug you just for the insult." Time slowed down. Eleanor saw the dark hole of the pistol's muzzle. She saw the man's dirty finger tightening on the trigger. She heard the miner whimpering. In that second, she was not Leo, the tough Mexican boy. She was not Eleanor, the dutiful daughter. She was just a terrified animal, cornered and about to die. But the guard, who had been lying face down, had left his pistol on the coach seat when he was pulled out. It was an old Colt, heavy and dark. It was lying just inside the open door, not 2 feet from where she had fallen. She did not think, she reacted. She lunged, her hand closing around the cold, checkered grip of the pistol. She rolled onto her back, bringing the heavy weapon up with both hands, her arms shaking violently. The robber stared, surprised by her sudden movement. "Drop it, boy, or I will." Eleanor screamed. It was a high, thin sound, nothing like Leo's grunt. She squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The recoil slammed her shoulders back against the dirt, and the bullet went wild, flying high over the robber's head. But it was enough. The crack of the unexpected shot, the scream, the bullet whining past his ear. It startled the robber. More importantly, it startled his horse. The animal reared, screaming in panic. The other robber's horses, already on edge, caught the fear. One of them bucked, throwing its rider. The driver seized the opportunity, lunging for the shotgun still in its boot. "They are just kids," the driver yelled. "Get them!" The ambush dissolved into chaos. The robber whose horse had bucked was scrambling for his rifle. The one who had threatened Eleanor was fighting to control his mount. The third man, seeing the tide turn, fired one more wild shot and spurred his horse back up the pass. "Get back in the coach," the guard bellowed, finally grabbing his own rifle. "Go, go!" The passengers dove back inside. Eleanor scrambled in last, still clutching the heavy Colt, her entire body vibrating with shock. The driver cracked his whip, and the stagecoach lurched forward, horses straining as it clawed its way up the rest of the pass. They did not stop for another 2 hours. When they finally pulled into the next way station, a dusty, sun-bleached collection of buildings called Mesa Roja, the passengers stumbled out. The gambler lit a thin cigar, his hands perfectly steady. "Exciting afternoon," he commented to no one. Shorty, the cowboy, looked at Eleanor. She was leaning against the coach wheel, trying to stop shaking. She had dropped the pistol on the floorboards as if it were a hot coal. "You are a terrible shot, Leo," Shorty said, not unkindly. "You missed him by a mile, but your heart is in the right place." Eleanor just nodded, pulling her hat back on, her face hidden in its shadow. She knew she had been lucky. She also knew she had been seen. Her scream, her shaking hands, her terrible aim. She was not a boy. She was a woman playing a desperate part, and she had almost lost her life. She could not stay with these men. She had to get away, on her own. Chayton Greyhawk found the site of the robbery the next morning. It was not hard. The story was all over the territory, carried by telegraph and travelers. He sat his horse on the ridge above the pass, reading the signs in the dust below. It was all there, clear as print. He saw the tracks of the stagecoach. He saw where it had stopped. He saw the boot prints of the passengers, the divots where they had thrown their wallets. He saw the tracks of 3 horses, shot in a way that meant they were local, probably from one of the border gangs. He saw where one rider had been thrown, the scuff marks of his fall. And he saw something else. He dismounted, kneeling in the dust, alongside the tracks of the black stallion Raven, which had been following the coach route. He saw another set of tracks. They were small, too small for a man, even a small one. The boot was worn, but the heel was slightly built, the sole narrow. It was not the heavy, square-toed boot of a cowboy or a miner. He followed these small tracks to the spot where the passenger had fallen after being struck. He saw the imprint of a small body in the dust. He saw where the same small boots had scrambled, digging in for purchase. He saw where the person had lunged for the coach door. He looked around. The bullet had struck the cliff face 20 feet above where the robber had stood. He smiled grimly. Shorty was right. It was a terrible shot. Chayton mounted up, his mind working. The thief he was hunting, this Leo Morales, was not just small. He was clumsy with a gun. He wore strange boots, and he had been traveling with the stagecoach, not just following it. Then, for some reason, he had separated from it. The tracks for Raven and the small boots veered off the main road about a mile before the Mesa Roja station. The boy was traveling alone now, and he was spooked. He followed the trail. It was easy. The thief was riding hard, pushing the stallion, but he was not covering his tracks. He was an amateur. He was running. The tracks led toward a massive, flat-topped mesa that dominated the horizon. Chayton reached the Mesa Roja way station by midday. The station master, a weary man with skin like old leather, was happy to talk for the price of a beer. "Oh yeah, the stage came through," the man said, wiping down the bar. "Full of stories about the robbery," said the little Mexican fella, scared them off, though he did not come in with them. Showed up maybe an hour later, all alone. "This Mexican boy," Chayton said, keeping his voice casual. "What did he look like?" "Scrawny, looked half-starved. Poor kid, and quiet. Did not say 2 words. Just bought some hardtack and a canteen of water. Paid in cash. Seemed desperate to get on his way." The man paused, scratching his chin. "Funny thing, though, the missus, she was cleaning the bunk room after he left, said he was muttering in his sleep, and it was not Spanish. She said it was clear as a bell. Sounded like a rich man's English, all proper and high-toned." Chayton thanked the man and left. A Mexican boy who wore small boots, could not shoot, and spoke like a Boston senator in his sleep. The puzzle was taking shape, and the picture it made was not the one Kane had painted. He picked up the trail again, leaving the station behind. The tracks were fresher now, only a few hours old. They led away from the road, up a winding rocky path toward a small, hidden spring at the base of the great mesa. The thief was looking for water, a place to rest. Chayton moved quietly, dismounting and leading his horse the last quarter-mile. He moved through the scrub oak and juniper like a ghost. He heard the stallion, Raven, nicker softly before he saw it. The horse was tied to a cottonwood tree near the water. And there, by the edge of the spring, was the thief. The boy, Leo, was kneeling by the water, his back to Chayton. He was small, just as the station master had said, wrapped in a jacket that was far too large for him. Chayton stepped out from the trees, his boots silent on the sandy soil. He was 20 feet away when the boy sensed him. The small figure scrambled to his feet. Spinning around, he ripped a pistol from his belt, a different one this time. Smaller, but he fumbled it, his hands shaking. He looked terrified. Chayton stopped. He saw the dirt-smeared face, the wide, panicked eyes. He saw the rough-cut hair, but it was not a boy. He knew it, instantly and completely. He looked at the slender hands, the delicate line of the jaw, the terror in her eyes that was not the fear of a thief, but of a hunted animal. His eyes drifted to the ground beside her. There, half buried in the mud where she had knelt, was a patch of white. It was fabric. He saw where she had slipped earlier, higher up the bank. The soft mud held a perfect, undeniable imprint. Not of a boot, not of canvas trousers, but of fine, delicate lace. A piece of that same lace was snagged on a nearby thorny bush, a white flag of surrender. He looked back at the terrified woman holding a gun she barely knew how to aim. He saw the faint, purpled bruises on her throat, just above the collar of her dirty shirt. The pieces clicked into place. The small boots, the terrible shot, the rich man's English, the bruises. This was not Leo Morales, the horse thief. This was a woman. This was Silas Kane's important property. Chayton raised his hands slowly, palms out. "I am not here to hurt you," he said, his voice quiet. The woman's eyes widened, her knuckles white as she gripped the pistol. "Who are you?" she whispered, and her voice, rough with dust and fear, was the voice of a woman, not a boy. "My name is Chayton Greyhawk," he said. He took one slow step closer. "And you are a long way from home." He found her where the high red rocks narrowed into a small, box canyon. The spring he had seen was at the far end, shaded by a few stubborn cottonwoods. The black stallion, Raven, was tied to one of them, pulling nervously at its rope, its ears flicking back and forth. The horse knew he was there. The woman did not. She was struggling with the saddle cinch, trying to tighten it. Her movements were clumsy, frustrated. The horse, a powerful animal that sensed her fear, kept sidestepping, pulling the reins from her grasp. "Hold still!" she hissed at the horse, her voice a low, desperate rasp. "Just hold still. Curse you!" Chayton left his own horse tied 100 yards back, hidden in a thicket of juniper. He moved on foot, his moccasins making no sound on the packed red earth. He stayed in the shadows of the canyon wall, moving with a patience he had learned from hunting deer, from hunting men. He was close now, no more than 30 feet. He could smell the horse's sweat and the faint, dusty scent of the woman herself. He watched her give up on the saddle and turn to the horse's head, trying to soothe it. She stroked its muzzle, her small, dirty hand trembling. "It is all right, Raven. It is all right. We just have to go a little further." Chayton chose that moment to step out from the shadows. He did not make a sound, but the stallion saw him. The horse threw its head up, snorting a loud alarm, its eyes rolling wide. The woman spun around. Her hand flew to the pistol tucked in her belt. She ripped it free, fumbling the grip, but she managed to raise it, pointing it at his chest with both shaking hands. Her face was streaked with grime and sweat. Her floppy hat was pulled low, shadowing her eyes, but he could see the panic in them. "Stay back," she yelled. Her voice cracked, trying to find the low, rough tone of Leo, but only managing a desperate, high-pitched shout. "I swear I will shoot. I have done it before." Chayton stopped. He kept his hands open, away from his body, away from the pistol at his own hip. He saw the way she held the gun, her knuckles white, her arms locked straight, her entire body rigid with terror. She was a trigger pull away from a shot that could go anywhere. "I heard," he said, his voice calm, pitched low to soothe, not to threaten. "It was a terrible shot. You missed the man by 20 feet. He spoke in English. The word, clear and calm, seemed to startle her more than a threat would have. I will not miss this time," she stammered, trying to steady the gun's heavy barrel. He took one slow, deliberate step to his left, moving away from the direct line of the horse, giving her a clear field of fire. It was a gesture of non-aggression. He was showing her he was not lunging, not attacking. "Your hands are shaking," he said, still quiet. "You are going to hurt yourself, or the horse. Just put the gun down. Pon el arma en el suelo. Despacio." He switched to Spanish, testing her, watching her reaction. Her eyes flickered, confused. She understood English. The Spanish, not so much. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Did Kane send you? Are you one of his hunters?" "I am just a man," he said. He took another slow step, angling slightly. She tried to follow him with the pistol, her arms straining. "And you are tired. You are scared. And you are done running, at least for today." He was only 10 feet from her now. He could see the pulse beating frantically in her throat, just above the dirty collar of her shirt. He saw the faint purple and yellow shadows of bruises there. "I am not going back," she cried, her voice breaking. "You cannot make me go back." She was shifting her weight, her finger tightening on the trigger, a spasm of pure fear. He knew he had only a second. He moved. It was not a rush, but a flow. In one swift, fluid motion, he closed the distance. His left hand shot out and clamped down on her wrists, forcing the pistol's barrel up, away from his body. The gun exploded, the sound of a deafening crack in the small canyon. The bullet screamed off the rock wall high above their heads. She screamed, a raw sound of pure terror, fighting against his grip. She was stronger than he expected, fueled by panic. But he was still stronger. He twisted her hands, his thumb finding the nerve in her wrist. Her fingers spasmed open, and the pistol fell to the dirt. With his other hand, he grabbed the bandana tied around her neck and the floppy hat on her head and yanked them both off in one sharp pull. She froze. Her short, hacked blonde hair, matted with sweat and dust, was revealed. Without the hat's shadow, her face was starkly visible. It was the face of a high-born woman. Pale skin, now sunburned and dirty. A fine, straight nose, and eyes, not the dark eyes of a Mexican boy, but a brilliant, terrified blue. Her neck, where the bandana had been, was white and slender, and the bruises on her throat were clear, ugly, and shaped like fingers. He let go of her wrists. She stumbled back, clutching her hand, her breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. She stared at him, her mask gone, her secret laid bare in the harsh desert light. Chayton looked at her. He saw the ruins of a society girl, dressed in the stolen clothes of a stable hand. He saw the fear, but underneath it, a furious, defiant anger. He looked at the gun lying in the dust. He looked at the bruises on her neck. He bent and picked up the pistol, tucking it into his own belt. He then reached down and retrieved her hat, holding it out to her. She flinched, not taking it. "He lied," Chayton said. "It was a flat statement. Silas Kane. He said he was hunting a boy, a horse thief." Nora's breathing was still erratic, but the sobs quieted. She wrapped her arms around herself, her eyes darting from him to the horse, to the mouth of the canyon, looking for an escape she knew she could not make. "I am not a thief," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He is the thief. He tried to—" She stopped, her face contorting, the shame and anger of her memory warring with her fear of him. He tried to what Chayton asked, his voice still quiet, but with a new, hard edge. "He said I belonged to him. My father agreed." She spat the words out, as if they were poison. "It was a contract, a merger. I was just part of the deal. And when I did not act like a grateful piece of property, he put his hands on me." She touched her own throat, her fingers tracing the bruises. "He told me he would teach me to be obedient. He told me if I was not, he would have me locked away, in a sanitarium. He said I was hysterical." She looked up, and her blue eyes were not just scared, they were burning. "I will not be locked away. I will not be his property. I would rather die out here than go back to him." Chayton stared at her for a long time. He saw the truth in her face. He saw the terror, but he also saw the iron underneath it. This was not a thief. This was a runaway, an escapee, and she had run from a monster he now worked for. The gold in his pocket felt suddenly very heavy. 100 gold eagles, enough to save his people. All he had to do was tie this woman up and drag her back to the man who had bruised her, the man who considered her a thing to be owned. His face hardened. His expression went flat. The one he used when he was a cavalry scout. The one that showed nothing. A job was a job. His people were starving. This woman, with her rich father and her white skin, was not his problem. She was just a complication. "You stole his horse," he said, his voice cold, "and his ledger." Her eyes widened. "How did you know about the ledger?" "He wants it back. He wants you back." He pulled a coil of rope from his belt. "My job is to bring you to him." Panic seized her again. She took a step back, her hands coming up. "No, please, you do not understand. He is a monster. He will kill me, or worse. I have money. What is he paying you? I can double it. My father." "Your father is the one who sold you." Chayton cut her off. The words were brutal, but they were true. "Then I will fight you," she said, her voice dropping, trembling but fierce. She grabbed a rock from the ground, holding it like a weapon. "I will not go back. I will not." He looked at her, this small, desperate woman in her ridiculous clothes, holding a rock against a man with 2 guns and a knife. She was pathetic, and she was magnificent. She was trembling from head to toe, but she was standing her ground. She was running from a hell he could barely imagine. And she still had a fight left in her. He looked at the bruises on her neck again. He thought of the wild mare he had let go, the one that just wanted to be free. He thought of the Apache women running from the burning hogans. He thought of the weight of the captain's silver dollars in his hand. He was so tired of tying up things that were meant to be free. Nora saw the hesitation in his face, the flicker of something behind his cold, dark eyes. She took a desperate gamble. "You think you are different from me," she said, her voice shaking but rising in power. "You think because you are the one holding the rope. You are the one who is free. You are wrong. He told me. He told my father. He talked about you. He said—" She faltered, then pushed on, the words tumbling out. "He said men like you are just commodities that can ride a horse, an Indian tracker. He said you were a tool, worth a little more than I am, but still just something to be bought, to be used and thrown away when he is done. You are his property, too. You just do not know it yet." The words struck him like a physical blow. He froze. A commodity that can ride a horse. It was the echo of his own deepest shame, the voice of the cavalry captain, the voice of Marshal Pike, the voice of every white man who had ever looked at him and seen a tool. Not a man. He had taken Cain's gold, and in doing so, he had proven her right. He had proven them all right. He was no better than the man he hunted. He was no better than the man who had put those bruises on her neck. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. The canyon wind whispered over the rocks. The stallion, Raven, shook his head, his harness jingling, the sound unnaturally loud. Chayton looked at the rope in his hand. He looked at her. He made a decision. It was a decision that could cost him his life. It was a decision that would certainly cost him the gold. It was the only decision he could live with. His face remained a mask of cold indifference. He had to lie. If she was his partner, she would be weak. If she was his prisoner, she might learn to be strong. "He is right," Chayton said, his voice hard. "You are property, and you are my prisoner." Her face fell. The small spark of hope in her eyes died, replaced by a cold, bleak despair. He stepped forward. She did not raise the rock. She had no fight left. He took it from her unresisting hand and tossed it aside. He grabbed her wrists. They were thin, like a bird's. He wrapped the rope around them, pulling it just tight enough to hold, but leaving it loose enough not to cut her skin. It was a tracker's knot, not a captor's. It would hold until she fought it, and then it would give, but she did not know that. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered, her eyes fixed on the ground, her voice dead. "Back to Las Piedras. He lied. To Cain. Now, move. We rode double on my horse. The stallion is lame. He has thrown a shoe." He had seen it when he first arrived. The horse was favoring its left foreleg. This Leo truly knew nothing about horses or the desert. He pulled her along, his hand on her arm. He untied his own horse, a tough buckskin, and mounted. He reached down, grabbed her by the front of her jacket, and hauled her up, setting her in the saddle in front of him. She was light, almost weightless. She sat rigid, her bound hands in her lap, her back straight, refusing to lean against him. He spurred the horse, not back toward the south, toward Las Piedras, but to the north, away from the town, away from the railroad, toward the high, empty mesas that were his people's refuge. "This is not the way we came," she said after an hour, her voice small, suspicious. "I am the tracker," he said, his voice rough in her ear. "I say which way we go." They rode until the sun was a dying ember, painting the clouds in shades of orange and blood. The desert turned cold quickly, the vast, empty silence pressing in on them. Chayton finally stopped in a shallow draw, sheltered from the wind by a fall of ancient boulders. He dismounted, then pulled her down. Her legs were stiff, and she stumbled. He cut the ropes on her wrists with his knife. She rubbed her skin, watching him with wary, hateful eyes. "Gather firewood," he ordered, tossing her the hat she had left behind. "Anything dry. Move." She hesitated, then obeyed, her anger giving her a new purpose. While she scrambled over the rocks, he built a small, smokeless fire, using the skills the cavalry had paid him so well to learn. He laid out his bedroll and a single blanket. When the fire was lit, a small circle of warmth in the immense, cold dark. He sat back on his heels. He took some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag and tossed a piece to her. She caught it, surprised. She sat on the other side of the fire, as far from him as she could get while still feeling its heat. She ate the dry, tasteless food like a starving animal. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the mournful, lonely cry of a coyote, far off in the hills. Nora flinched at the sound. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, searching the darkness beyond the firelight. "What was that?" she whispered. "Coyote," he said. Another cry joined the first, closer this time, a yipping, howling chorus. It sounded like a dozen animals surrounding them, laughing at them. Nora scrambled to her feet, her terror palpable. She looked out into the blackness, then back at Chayton, at the fire, at the steep, dark walls of the draw. She took a step, then another, away from the fire, into the cold. She was going to run. He saw it in her eyes. She was going to try and escape into the open desert, in the dark, with no water, no weapon, and coyotes on the prowl. He did not move. He just watched her. She took 3 more steps. The wind hit her, cold and sharp, pulling at her oversized jacket. The howling rose again, seeming to come from the very direction she was heading. She stopped. She stood frozen, a small, lost figure in a world that would kill her in an hour. She looked back at him. He was just a shadow by the fire, his face unreadable, his arms resting on his knees. He was a captor. He was a savage. He was the only thing between her and the howling dark. Slowly, defeated, she walked back. She did not sit close to him. She returned to her rock, pulling the thin, worn blanket he had given her around her shoulders. She sat staring at the flames, her body rigid with suspicion, but no longer willing to face the wilderness alone. She was trapped by the desert, trapped by the night, and trapped by the silent, dangerous man who had lied to her, and, for a reason she could not possibly understand, had just saved her life. The sun rose with a brutal, white indifference. It found them already moving. Chayton on his buckskin, Nora mounted on the black stallion, Raven. Chayton had gone back for the horse before dawn, moving with a silent swiftness that unnerved her. He had examined the stallion's hoof in the gray light, produced a file and a tool from his saddlebag, and in less than 30 minutes had reset the shoe with a cold, practiced efficiency. He was a man who understood the mechanics of survival, and a good horse was paramount. Now, he led her deeper into the trackless red rock wilderness, heading north. He had not spoken a word to her since ordering her to gather firewood. He was a silent, imposing figure. his back straight, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, the ridges, the sky. Nora, for her part, was a bundle of raw nerves, pride, and misery. Every muscle in her body ached from days in the stagecoach, followed by the long ride on his horse. And now, another ride on a stallion too large for her. The rough canvas trousers chafed her skin. Her hands, soft and pale beneath the grime, were already blistering from the reins. She felt weak, foolish, and entirely at his mercy. He was her captor, and she hated him for it. But he was also, as the night had proven, her only protector. The contradiction was a bitter pill. Around mid-morning, the wind began to rise. It started as a whisper, a cool breath that felt good against her sunburned skin. But it did not stop. It grew stronger, a steady, whining push that carried sand with it. The grain stung her face, got in her eyes, her mouth. Chayton stopped. He pulled the bandana from his neck. "Wrap this around your face," he ordered, tossing it to her. "Cover your nose and mouth, and do not talk." She bristled at his tone. "I am fine." He turned his horse to face her. His eyes were flat, devoid of patience. "When the wind blows from the east, it brings the storm. You will breathe dust until your lungs fill. You will be blind in 1 minute. You are not fine. You are a fool, and you will do as I say." He was not wrong. The sky was no longer blue. It was turning a sick yellowish brown. The sun was a dull, hazy disk. The wind was not just whining, it was starting to howl. Humiliated, her eyes stinging, she fumbled with the bandana, her cold fingers clumsy. She tied it around her face, the rough cotton smelling of him of dust, leather, and sweat. "This land does not care about your pride," he said, his voice muffled by his own mask. "It only cares if you are smart enough to live until sundown. You do not look at the ground. You look at the sky. You do not drink when you are hot. You drink when you are cold. At night, and you find water not by looking for water, but by looking for what needs it. A line of cottonwoods, doves in the morning. That is how you live." "Why are you teaching me?" she threw back, her voice tight with resentment. "Why do you care if I live I am your prisoner? Isn't a dead prisoner easier to manage?" "A dead prisoner is not worth 100 gold eagles," he said, the words a cold slap. He turned his horse and kicked it into a trot. "Stay close. Do not fall behind." He had said it to wound her, to keep the distance between them. But as she spurred Raven to follow, a cold dread settled in her stomach. He was right. She was just a bag of gold to him. The storm hit them an hour later. It did not arrive. It detonated. The yellow sky turned a deep, angry orange, then a choking, midnight brown. The wind shrieked, a solid wall of noise and force that threatened to rip her from the saddle. She could not see Chayton, who was only 10 feet in front of her. She could not see her horse's ears. Sand and grit blasted every inch of her. It felt like being scoured with hot needles. Her eyes, even squinting, burned with agony. She could not breathe. The bandana was useless against the sheer volume of dust. She was suffocating. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. This was not a storm. This was the end of the world. She pulled on the reins, but Raven, blinded and terrified, was spinning in circles, screaming a high, equine terror. Nora lost her stirrups. She was falling. She was going to die here, alone, buried alive in the red dark. She screamed his name. The sound was ripped from her mouth, unheard. Suddenly, a hand, hard as iron, clamped onto her arm. He was there, a dark shape looming out of the swirling chaos. He had dismounted and was beside her. He did not speak. He hauled her from the saddle, his arm a steel band around her waist. She fell against him, half collapsing. "This way, keep your head down," he bellowed into her ear, his voice barely audible over the roar. He dragged her, stumbling, blind, her lungs on fire. He seemed to be able to see in the darkness. He pulled her toward a black shadow. a slit in the rock face she had not even noticed. It was a narrow cleft, barely wide enough for two people. He shoved her inside, then pressed in after her, his body shielding the entrance from the worst of the blast. The change was immediate. The roar of the wind dropped to a deafening, high-pitched whistle, but the direct assault of the sand was gone. It was dark in the crevice, and suffocatingly close. Nora collapsed against the rock wall, gulping in air that was more dust than oxygen, her entire body shaking in a violent, uncontrollable tremor. Chayton leaned against the opposite wall, his chest heaving. He pulled his bandana down, spitting a mouthful of mud onto the floor. Nora did the same, coughing, her throat raw. They were trapped. The cleft was no more than 3 feet deep and perhaps 4 feet wide. They were forced to stand, their knees almost touching. The dim, brown light from the outside world cast strange, flickering shadows. Nora's terror slowly subsided, replaced by the acute, horrifying awareness of their proximity. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the leather of his vest, the faint, clean scent of the juniper he had used for last night's fire. He was close enough that she could see the pulse in his neck, the way his dark, wet hair curled against his collar. He had unbuttoned his shirt to empty the sand from it, and the movement drew her eye. There, on the dark skin of his left pectoral, was a tattoo. It was not a name or a simple design. It was a complex pattern of lines and symbols, a dark blue spiral that seemed to pull her gaze inward. It was beautiful, and it looked ancient. She did not know why she asked. Perhaps it was the shared terror, the intimacy of their refuge. Perhaps it was just a desperate need to hear a human voice that was not screaming. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice rough. "On your chest." He flinched, as if she had touched him. His hand instinctively came up to cover the mark, and his eyes, when they met hers, were guarded and cold. He began to button his shirt. "Please," she said, surprised by her own boldness. I have never seen anything like it." He stopped. He looked down at the tattoo, his fingers tracing the outline. He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the howling of the wind outside, a mournful chorus. "It is a mark of shame," he said finally, his voice so low she had to strain to hear him. "Among my people, the Dine. Our markings tell our story. This one marks a man who has turned his back on his own people, a man who led their enemies, a man who traded blood for silver." He did not look at her. He looked past her, into the swirling brown storm. But he was seeing something else. He was seeing burning hogans. He was seeing the faces of the cavalry officers. Nora stared at him. The arrogance, the coldness she had seen in him, suddenly fractured. She saw the pain underneath. It was a deep, old wound, a mirror of the shame she felt for her own family, her own weakness. This man, this savage who had captured her, was also a prisoner. "You are not," she started, but she did not know what to say. He looked at her, his eyes hard again, angry at his own admission. "It does not matter what I am, it matters what I do, and I am taking you to Cain." He finished buttoning his shirt, the intimacy of the moment broken, the wall rebuilt. They stood in that suffocating silent darkness for another 2 hours, until the wind finally began to lose its fury. 2 days later, they arrived at a place called Pacheco's Station. It was a lone adobe building in a wide, sun-scorched valley, a way station for the few travelers who passed this way. Chayton had led them on a winding, difficult path through the high country. Nora was exhausted to the bone, but she was also alive. She had learned to tie the bandana without being told. She had learned to watch the horizon. Chayton dismounted, his movement stiff. "We need supplies, and I need to know who is looking for us." He looked at her. "You are my cousin, from the east. You do not speak much. You just nod. Understand." Nora nodded, too tired to argue. The lie was easier than the truth. They walked inside. The main room was dark and cool, smelling of chili. stale beer, and dust. A thick, dark-beamed ceiling hung low. A few miners sat at a table, playing cards. A large man with a magnificent, drooping mustache and a kind face was wiping the bar. "Chayton," the man boomed, his face breaking into a wide smile. "It has been too long. My friend, where have you been hiding?" "Around, Miguel," Chayton said, his voice relaxing for the first time since she had met him. He even smiled, a small, weary lifting of his mouth. "This is my cousin, Leo. He is traveling with me." Don Miguel looked at Nora, his dark eyes shrewd. He appraised her small frame, her oversized, dirty clothes, the way she hid in the shadow of her hat. He nodded slowly. "Bienvenidos. Leo, welcome to my home. My wife, Rosa, is in the kitchen. She will bring you food. You both look half-starved." A woman emerged from the back, wiping her hands on an apron. She was round, with graying black hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kindest eyes Nora had ever seen. She looked at Chayton with affection. Then her gaze fell on Nora. She stopped. Her eyes lingered, taking in the small hands, the slender neck, the terrified eyes. Rosa's own expression softened with a deep, immediate understanding. She knew. "Come," Rosa said to Nora, her voice gentle. "You must be tired. Muchacho, come and help me in the kitchen. I have fresh tortillas." Nora looked at Chayton, uncertain. He nodded. "Go, it is safe." Nora followed Rosa into the kitchen, a warm, bright room that smelled of baking corn and spices. As soon as the door swung shut, Rosa took the canteen from Nora's hand and filled it with cool water. "You are a brave girl," Rosa said quietly, not looking at her. "But you are a terrible liar, Mia." "And so is he. Cousin," she snorted softly. "He does not have a single cousin who looks like you." Nora's breath hitched. She had been holding her terror for so long that the simple act of kindness almost broke her. "Please," Nora whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Please do not tell anyone. He will find me." Rosa turned and put a warm, flour-dusted hand on Nora's arm. "He, the man who paid Chayton to find you?" Nora nodded, her lip trembling. "I have seen men like that," Rosa said, her voice turning hard. "Men who think a woman is a piece of property. My own father tried to marry me to a man twice my age, a cruel man with dead eyes, just for 100 acres of land." She looked Nora square in the face. "I ran too. I chose Miguel. It was the best decision I ever made." She bustled over to the stove. "You will eat. You will rest. Don Miguel and I, we see nothing. We only see Chayton and his young cousin. Your secret is safe here." Meanwhile, in the main room, Don Miguel poured Chayton a glass of whiskey. He leaned in, his voice low, his jovial manner gone. "You are in trouble, my friend," he said, his back to the miners. "A deep and dangerous trouble. Silas Kane has put a bounty on your head, and on the head of the Mexican boy you are supposedly hunting. $500. For a horse thief, it does not make sense." Chayton's hand tightened around his glass. 500. The price had gone up. Kane was not just angry, he was desperate. "It gets worse," Miguel continued. "He has hired Cole Maddox to lead the hunt." The name landed like a punch. Chayton looked up, his face grim. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew it. Maddox was a former cavalry scout, a man who had been drummed out of the army for massacring a camp of unarmed Apache women and children. He was a killer for hire, a sadist who enjoyed his work. They said he had once shot an Apache child who was trying to surrender, just to test a new rifle. "Maddox was through here yesterday," Miguel said. "He was asking questions, describing you, describing a small Mexican boy. He is heading north, toward the mesas. He is hunting you, Chayton, and he is not hunting you to bring you back alive." Chayton finished his whiskey in one swallow, the liquid burning a hot trail down his throat. He was no longer a bounty hunter. He was the prey. They left an hour later, their saddlebags filled with food, their canteens full. Rosa had pressed a small bag of herbs into Nora's hand. "For the scrapes," she had whispered, giving her a fierce hug. "Be brave. Vaya con Dios." They rode hard, pushing the horses. The sense of sanctuary was gone, replaced by a new, urgent fear. They were no longer just running from Cain. They were being hunted by Maddox. The attack came as they were clearing the valley, entering a narrow pass. 3 men, appearing as if from the rocks themselves, rode out to block their path. They were not Maddox's men. They were local bandits, scavengers, their faces hard and hungry. Well, the leader, a man with a scarred face, grinned, his rifle held loosely across his saddle. "That is a fine-looking stallion. And that buckskin is not bad either. Hand them over, and your supplies." Chayton reined on his horse. He put his hand up, signaling Nora to stop behind him. "We do not want any trouble," he said, his voice calm, his eyes scanning the 3 men. "And you will not get any," the scarred man said. "Just get off the horses, nice and slow." "I cannot do that," Chayton said. He was calculating the odds. 3 to 1, not good. The man's grin faded. He raised his rifle. "I am not asking." Chayton moved. He spurred his horse forward and to the left, drawing the man's fire. The rifle cracked, the bullet snapping past Chayton's ear. He drew his own pistol, firing twice. One man grunted and clutched his shoulder. The other fired, and Chayton's horse reared in pain, a bullet grazing its neck. Nora screamed. The second bandit, the one who was unhurt, was turning his horse, raising his pistol to aim at Chayton's back. Chayton was fighting his terrified horse, trying to get a clear shot. He was exposed. Nora saw it happen in a blur of dust and smoke, the man aiming at Chayton. Chayton, vulnerable. She had no gun. She had no skill. All she had was a horse. She remembered the stagecoach robbery. This time, she did not hesitate. She screamed, a raw, furious sound, and kicked Raven with all her might. The powerful stallion, already spooked by the gunfire, leaped forward, straight at the flank of the bandit's horse. It was a reckless, suicidal move. The bandit, surprised by the sudden charge from the boy, turned to fire at her, but Raven, a far superior animal, slammed into his horse's side. The bandit's horse stumbled, neighing in panic, and the bandit's shot went wild. He lost his balance, his rifle flying from his hand as he fought to stay in the saddle. It was the opening Chayton needed. He steadied his horse, aimed, and fired. The man fell. The third man, the one clutching his shoulder, saw his partners go down. He cursed, wheeled his horse, and fled back into the rocks. It was over in 30 seconds. The pass was suddenly, terribly silent, broken only by the heaving breaths of the horses and the low groan of the man on the ground. Chayton swung down from his horse, his face a mask of stone. He checked his mount's neck. It was a bloody graze, but not serious. He walked over to the bandit he had shot. The man was dead. He ignored the other. Nora was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. She had charged a man with a gun. She had almost been killed. Chayton walked over to her. He stood looking up at her, his face unreadable in the harsh sunlight. She thought he would be angry. She thought he would yell at her for her stupidity, for interfering. He reached up, his hand calloused and rough, and gently took the reins from her trembling fingers. Then he looked at her hand. It was bleeding. She had scraped it raw on her saddle horn when the horse charged. He pulled a clean strip of cloth from his saddlebag. Wordlessly, he began to wrap her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. She watched him, her heart hammering, her breath caught in her throat. He finished tying the knot. He looked up, and his dark eyes were not angry. They were something else, something she had never seen before. Respect. "Good work," he said quietly. He turned, mounted his horse, and spurred it forward, leaving her to follow. Nora stared at the bandage on her hand. Her ears were ringing. Good work. It was a small thing. 2 words. But it was the first time in her entire life that anyone had praised her for her courage, rather than her obedience. It was the first time she had ever been told she was good, not for being quiet, but for being brave. That night, they camped high on a mesa, the fire small, the air cold. The adrenaline of the fight had faded, leaving them both exhausted and tense. Nora finally broke the silence. "Why did you take his money?" she asked, staring into the flames. "Silas Kane. Why would you work for a man like that?" Chayton was cleaning his pistol, his movements precise, economical. He did not look up. "Why does any man do what he hates for money?" "For gold," she pressed, a hint of her old disdain in her voice. He stopped his work. He looked at her, and his eyes were tired. "You think it is for me? For trinkets I took his money because my people are starving, because the government that promised us food, warm blankets, and medicine if we moved off our sacred lands, gave us rotten flour and smallpox instead. I took his money because it is the only weapon they understand. It is the only way to buy back the land they stole, to feed the children who are coughing their lungs out." He returned to his pistol, his voice dropping. "I took his money because I am a traitor, and that is the price of my sin. It is a price I pay every day." Nora was silent. The gap between them, the space of captor and prisoner, suddenly felt smaller. She saw the man from the sandstorm, the man with the mark of shame on his chest. Her hand instinctively went to her jacket, to the hard, rectangular shape hidden in the inside pocket. The ledger, the book that held all of Kane's secrets, his payments, his bribes, his dark plans for the railroad, the lands, the mines. She had a weapon, too, a weapon far more powerful than gold. She looked at Chayton. His face was in shadow. His expression closed off again. He was a man of honor and a man of shame, a hunter and a protector. She did not trust him. Not yet. She could not. She pulled her hand away from the pocket, her secret still safe, still hers alone. He led her for another day, climbing higher, leaving the open desert for a maze of high-walled canyons. The trail vanished, or rather, it became a path only he could see. He had her dismount and lead Raven through a narrow fissure in the rock, a crack so tight the stallion's saddlebags scraped both walls. It opened up into a place that should not have existed. It was a valley, sunk deep into the earth, a perfect circle of green fed by a hidden spring. The air was cooler, filled with the scent of damp earth and pinon pine. Perhaps 24 hogans. Simple, round structures of mud and wood were scattered under a grove of ancient cottonwoods. Sheep grazed on a patch of lush grass. It was a secret, a sanctuary, a place of peace carved from the heart of the brutal wilderness. Nora stopped, her hand on Raven's neck, staring. This was Chayton's home. This was where he had been leading her. Not to Las Piedras, not to Kane. A figure detached itself from the shadow of the largest hogan and ran toward them. It was a young woman, perhaps 17 or 18 years old, her black hair in 2 long braids, her face bright with intelligence and joy. She was wearing a traditional woven skirt, but a man's plaid shirt, the sleeves rolled up. "Chayton!" she cried, her voice ringing with relief. She launched herself at him, and he caught her, a genuine smile breaking across his stern face as he hugged her. It was the first time Nora had seen him smile. It changed his entire face, erasing the hardness, revealing the man beneath the scout. "I was safe, little sister," he said, setting her down. "I told you I would be." "You are never safe," she retorted, punching his arm. "You are reckless. And who—" Her bright, dark eyes fell on Nora. The smile vanished, replaced by a guarded, intense curiosity. She looked at Nora's filthy, oversized clothes, her short, jagged hair, her pale, sunburned face. She looked at Chayton, one eyebrow raised in a question he did not answer. "This is Leo," Chayton said, his voice carefully neutral. She is traveling with me. She needs a place to rest, safely. The girl. Lena Two Rivers circled Nora slowly, her gaze missing nothing. She saw the blisters on Nora's hands, the fine, expensive texture of the linen shirt beneath the grime. She saw the terror in Nora's eyes. Leo, Lena repeated, testing the name. She looked back at Chayton. He is a woman, cousin, and a white woman at that. What have you done? It is what I have not done, he said, his voice low. She is hunted, by Cain, and by Maddox. The name Maddox hung in the air, and the light in Lena's face dimmed, replaced by a cold fear. An old woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, emerged from the hogan, followed by two elders, their expressions grim. They looked at Nora, and there was no welcome in their eyes. There was only suspicion. You bring a bilagana here, one of the old men said, his voice a dry rasp. You bring the rabbit to the fox's den, white people bring only ash and sorrow. She is not like them, Chayton said, his voice firm. She runs from them, as we do. She needs sanctuary, grandfather. For 2 days. 2 days is long enough for a whisper to travel, the old woman said. She endangers us all. She looked at Nora with open hostility. Leave her in the desert. The land will take her, as it takes all things that do not belong. She stays, Chayton said. It was not a request. It was a statement, and the finality in his tone made even the elders pause. She saved my life. The old man's gaze sharpened. He looked from Chayton to Nora and back again. He gave a curt, reluctant nod. 2 days. Then she is gone. You are responsible. Chayton, her trouble is your trouble. Lena led Nora to a small, empty hogan. It was clean and cool, smelling of sage. She gave Nora a bowl of water and a strip of clean cloth. They are afraid, Lena said, her English precise, almost academic. The old ones. They have seen too much. They remember the long walk, when the soldiers burned our homes, our fields, and forced us to walk 300 miles to a prison camp. Many did not return. Nora, who was washing her face, paused. The grit and grime came away, revealing the pale, bruised skin beneath. The long walk. The government decided we were in the way, so they're located us. My grandmother died on that walk. Lena's voice was flat. Matter of fact, a recitation of a horror she had learned, not one she had lived. That is why we hide here. We are the ones who refused to go, or the ones who escaped. We do not trust strangers, especially white strangers. I am not, Nora stopped. I am not like them. I am not like Silas Cain. Who are you? Lena asked, sitting on a woven blanket, her dark eyes sharp. Nora hesitated. The weight of her secret, her lies, was suffocating. She looked at this young woman, so fierce and so intelligent, and she found herself wanting to tell the truth. My name is Eleanor. Eleanor Ward. Lena's eyes widened. Ward. Like Senator Ward from the East, the one who debates the railroad charters in Washington. Nora nodded, her stomach clenching. He is my father? Your father, Lena said slowly. Processing. And you are running from Silas Cain. They are partners. We read the newspapers that Don Miguel saves for us. They are building the railroad together. They are building it on lies, Nora said, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold anger. It is not just a railroad. Lena, it is a silver mine. I heard them talking about it. A mine hidden in one of the canyons north of here. That is what Cain wants. He is using my father, and the railroad, to get to it. Lena went very still. A silver mine, which canyon? I do not know. A deep one. A sacred one. They laughed about it. Cain said he would tear it open. Lena stood up, her face pale. You must tell the elders, now. She pulled Nora from the hogan. Chayton was with the old man, whose name was Hastian, mapping out a patrol route. "She must speak," Lena said, her voice urgent. "Tell them what you told me." Nora, her voice trembling, repeated her story. She spoke of her father, of Silas Kane, and of the silver mine hidden in a sacred canyon. Hastian's face, already stern, turned to granite. He said something in Dine, his voice a low, angry growl. He strode into his hogan and returned a moment later carrying a long, deer-hide tube. He unrolled it carefully on the hard-packed earth. It was a map. It was not a map of lines and names like Nora had seen in her father's study. It was a map of stories, of spirits, drawn in charcoal and paints made from earth. It showed the mesas, the rivers, the springs, and at its center, it showed a deep, spiraling canyon. "Pizza yet ai," Hastian said, his finger tracing the canyon's rim. "The canyon of the ancestors. It is not mine. It is a burial ground. It is where our first people are sleeping. It is the most sacred place in our world. To break that earth, it is not just theft. It is sacrilege. It would be the death of our spirits." He looked at Nora, and his eyes were full of a deep, profound sorrow. "This is what your father and his partner wished to do, to dig up our bones for their yellow metal." Nora felt sick. She looked at Chayton. His face was a mask of cold fury. The dots were connecting, the casual, evil greed of Kane's world crashing into the sacred, fragile world of this hidden valley. "There is more," Nora whispered. Her hand went to the hidden pocket in her jacket. The time for secrets was over. She pulled out the thick, leather-bound ledger. "I took this from him, from Kane. I thought it was just accounts, but I think it is everything." Chayton took the book from her hand. He opened it. His face was grim. He could read some English, but not the complex, small script. He looked at Lena. "Read it, aloud." They sat in the shade, the three of them, the book open on Lena's lap. For an hour, she read. Her voice, at first clear, became hesitant, then sick with disbelief. It was all there. It was worse than Nora had imagined. It was not just accounts. It was a meticulous record of Silas Kane's conquest. Lena read the list of payments. To Marshall Pike, for services rendered, $1,000. To the Indian agent at Fort Defiance, 4 spoiled flower contracts, $500. She read the lists of names under the heading Contract Labor. They were not American names. They were Chinese, Irish, and Mexican. Beside many was a single word, indebted. "He is not paying them?" "Chayton," Lena whispered, her finger tracing a line. "He is tricking them. They sign a contract they cannot read, and they are charged for their food, their tools, their passage. They are slaves. They can never leave." Then she found the last entry, dated just a week before Nora had fled. "Incident at Tunnel 4. Mine collapsed. 7 men lost. Chinese labor. Unregistered. Report filed minor blasting accident. No casualties. Expense $100 to Marshall Pike." For silence. Nora put her hand to her mouth. "He buried them alive." She said, "He buried 7 men and paid $100 to forget them." Chayton stood up. He walked away from them, his back rigid. He looked out over the peaceful valley, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had known Kane was a bad man, a greedy man. He had not known he was a monster. He had not known the scope of his evil. He had taken this man's money. He had agreed to hunt for him. And this man was planning to drive his railroad, built on the bodies of slaves, straight through the graves of Chayton's ancestors. He turned around. His face was calm, but his eyes were burning. He looked at Nora, and his gaze was no longer that of a captor. It was that of an ally. "He will not stop," Chayton said. "He will not stop until he has that silver, and he will destroy everything, and everyone. In his way." He looked at the ledger in Lena's lap. "That book is the only thing that can stop him." "What do we do?" Lena asked, looking at her cousin. "We cannot fight his army. We cannot fight his money," Chayton said, "but he is a white man, and he fears white man's law." He looked at Nora. "In Santa Fe, there is a federal judge, Judge Harper. He is a hard man, an old man, but they say he is not for sale. They say he believes in the Constitution. This book, if this book was read by a man like that—" "We have to take it to him," Nora said, her voice finding a new strength. She was no longer a victim. She was a witness. "It is a 4-day ride, and Maddox is between us and the city." Chayton said, "He will be watching the roads, the towns, the railroad depots." "Then we do not take the roads," Chayton said. Later that afternoon, Nora was standing by the small, clear stream that fed the valley. She was trying to wash the memory of the ledger from her mind, the simple, brutal arithmetic of Cain's evil. She heard a sound and saw Chayton walking toward her. He carried a small, wrapped bundle. He stopped a few feet from her. "Lena found these for you," he said. He handed her the bundle. It was a dine skirt, a woven belt, and a pair of soft, high moccasins. "They will be better for riding, and you will look less like a runaway." "Thank you," she whispered, taking the clothes. Their eyes met. The silence between them was no longer filled with suspicion. It was filled with a new, shared understanding, a shared purpose. "I am sorry," she said, her voice small. "About your ancestors, about the canyon." "It is not your fault," he said. "You are not your father." "I do not know what I am," she confessed, looking down at the water. "I spent my whole life being told what to be. A good daughter, a quiet wife. When I ran, I tried to be a boy. I am not good at any of it." "You were good in the canyon," he said quietly. "When you charged the bandit, that was brave." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Bravery is not being without fear," he said. "It is being terrified and doing it anyway." She looked up at him, at his hard, handsome face, at the pain she now knew he carried. He was a man of two worlds, and he had just chosen he was risking his life, the safety of his people, for her, for a cause. She was standing on a slick, mossy rock at the edge of the stream. She took a step back, a step she did not mean to take, and her foot slipped. She cried out, her arms flailing, and she fell backward. Chayton moved instantly. He lunged for her, his hand catching her arm, but her momentum pulled him with her. They crashed onto the soft, sandy bank together, a tangle of arms and legs. Nora landed half beneath him, his chest hard against hers. Her breath was driven from her lungs. She looked up, and his face was inches from hers. His dark eyes were wide, surprised, and no longer cold. She could see the flecks of gold in them. She could feel his breath, warm and tasting of juniper, on her cheek. The world stopped. There was no Cain, no Maddox, no desert. There was only the sound of the stream, the scent of damp earth, and the shocking, solid warmth of him. His hand was still on her arm, his other hand splayed on the ground beside her head. He was holding himself above her, but she could feel the hard muscle of his entire body. He looked at her mouth. She saw his gaze drop, and her own lips parted. He was going to kiss her. She knew it, and in that one, suspended moment, she wanted him to— she, who had been so brutalized by one man's touch, found herself craving the touch of this one. He lowered his head. She closed her eyes. Chayton. Lena's voice, sharp with panic, shattered the moment. Chayton recoiled as if he had been struck. He rolled off Nora, leaping to his feet in one fluid motion. He was breathing hard, his face a mask of anger and self-loathing. He had almost kissed his charge, his partner, the woman he had sworn to protect. Nora scrambled to her feet, her face burning. She could not look at him. Lena came running down the path, her face pale with real fear. "He is here," she panted, clutching her side. "Cole Maddox. He is at the trading post at Two Forks. Old Man Coyote just rode in. He heard him. Maddox is asking questions. He's offering money. for any word of a half-breed traitor and a boy thief. Chayton was already moving, his face the grim mask of the scout. The brief, vulnerable moment was gone, buried under the immediate, deadly threat. "He is too close," Chayton said. "He will find this valley. He can smell weakness." The elders gathered, their face dark with fear. The old woman who had first distrusted Nora pointed a trembling finger at her. "It is she. She is a curse. She has brought the wolf to our door. You must give her to him. Chayton, give him the white woman. He will take her and leave us in peace." "No," Chayton said, his voice flat. "If I give her to him, he will kill her, and then he will kill us for hiding her. Maddox does not leave witnesses, and he does not care about peace." He looked at the small, frightened band, his people. He had brought this danger to them. He had to lead it away. He strode over to Nora, who was standing frozen, clutching the dine skirt to her chest. "We are leaving," he said, his voice hard. All trace of softness gone. "Not in 2 days, not tomorrow, tonight, now." Where she whispered, her heart hammering. "To Santa Fe, to the judge." He grabbed his saddlebags from his hogan and threw them at her. "Put the clothes on. Pack the food Lena gives you. We ride north through the high canyons. It is the only way." He turned to his people. "We will lead him away, but he is a hunter. He will find your trail if you stay here. You must leave, scatter, go to the high rocks until the snow comes. He will not follow you there." There were cries of fear, of anger. They were being forced to run again, to leave their homes, their fields, because of him, because of her. Chayton turned his back on their sorrow. He could not afford to feel it. He grabbed the reins of his horse, his face carved from stone. He looked at Nora, who was watching him, her own face pale but resolute. The time for running was over. The time for fighting had begun. "There is no turning back now. Eleanor," he said, using her real name for the first time. "We deliver that book, or we die trying." They left the hidden valley under a moonless sky. The air was wrong. It was thick, heavy, and hot, carrying the metallic tang of ozone. Far to the north, the sharp peaks of the mountains were silhouetted by silent, flickering light, a storm gathering its breath. There was no wind, only a suffocating, expectant stillness. Chayton led the way, pushing his buckskin hard, with Nora following on the black stallion, Raven. She was wearing the dine skirt and moccasins Lena had given her. The soft deer hide felt strange against her legs, but it was 1,000 times better than the rough canvas trousers. She felt lighter, more connected to the horse. They rode out of the sanctuary canyon and onto a wide, grassy plain that stretched for miles. A pale, ghostly sea under the starlight. This was the open ground they had to cross to reach the high mesas. "Stay close," Chayton had ordered. His voice was tight, his face grim. "We cross this flat land before dawn. If Maddox is where Lena said, his scouts will be watching the passes. We must be gone before the sun comes up." Nora said nothing. She just rode, her knuckles white on the reins, the leather ledger digging into her side from inside her shirt. A hard reminder of their purpose, the near kiss by the stream, the panic of the escape. It had all merged into a single, thrumming nerve of adrenaline. She was no longer Eleanor Ward, the debutante, or Leo Morales, the boy thief. She was a woman riding into a war she did not understand, beside a man she was beginning to trust, which terrified her more than any storm. They had been riding for perhaps 3 hours when Chayton suddenly reined in his horse, his hand shooting up in a signal for her to stop. "What is it?" she whispered, pulling Raven to a halt beside him. The stallion tossed its head, sensing the tension. "Look," he said, his voice a low growl. He pointed not ahead, but to the east. On a low ridge, perhaps a mile distant, a single spark flared. A match. Then another, the tiny, telltale orange glow of a lit cigar. Then a cigarette. "Not Maddox?" Chayton breathed. his hand already moving toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Maddox would never be so careless. "This is a posse. Kane's men. They are waiting for us. How did they know?" The way station, a rancher, a telegraph. It does not matter. They know we are running north. They cut us off from the pass. We cannot go back. We cannot go around. "What do we do?" Nora asked, her heart sinking. They were trapped in the open. Chayton scanned the terrain. To their left was the wide, empty plain. To their right, the land rose sharply, breaking into the foothills of the great mesa, a fortress of red rock that climbed thousands of feet into the sky. "We go up," he said. "They will not expect us to climb in the dark. We can find cover in the rocks." "Can the horses make it?" "They will have to." He turned his horse, spurring it toward the dark, looming mass of the mesa. "Ride hard, and be ready." The men on the ridge saw the movement. A shout carried across the plain, thin and distant. Then came the flash and boom of a rifle shot, the bullet whining harmlessly over their heads. "They are coming!" Nora yelled, kicking Raven into a gallop. The stallion leaped forward, its powerful muscles devouring the ground. Chayton was just ahead of her. The chase was on. Bullets were snapping through the air now. Closer! The posse was riding hard, 6 or 7 men fanning out to cut them off. They reached the foothills, the ground becoming uneven, strewn with boulders and sharp scrub. The horses slowed, their breath coming in ragged, steaming clouds. Here Chayton yelled. He dismounted in a fluid motion, pulling his rifle free. "Behind these rocks, they cannot charge us here." He scrambled up a low rise, gesturing for her to bring the horses into a small, V-shaped shelter of stone. Nora slid from the saddle, her legs shaking. She grabbed the reins of both horses, pulling them into cover as Chayton found his position. The posse thundered up to the base of the rise, perhaps 80 yards distant, pulling their horses to a skittish stop, wary of the ambush. "Give it up!" Greyhawk, a man's voice, yelled. He was a large shadow on a pale horse. "Kane wants the girl, he just wants you dead. Send her out, and we might let you crawl away." Chayton sighted down the barrel of his rifle. He was calm, his breathing slow. "Get down," he said to Nora. "Stay with the horses. Keep them calm." He fired. The shot was a single sharp crack of thunder. The man on the pale horse grunted, his hat flying from his head, and he spurred his mount back, out of the light. "He is a dead shot," another man yelled. "Spread out, get him from the side." The gunfight began in earnest. Flashes of orange light erupted from the darkness below. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks above Nora's head, sending chips of stone stinging into the air. She crouched low, her arms around Raven's neck, her eyes shut tight, whispering desperate, meaningless words of comfort to the terrified animal. Chayton was not a man. He was a shadow. He fired, moved, fired again from a new position, then dropped back. He was using the terrain, the darkness, and his skill against their numbers. He was drawing their fire, making them waste ammunition. A man tried to flank them on the left, creeping through the rocks. Chayton saw the movement. He did not fire his rifle. He drew his pistol and waited. The man rose up, thinking he was unseen. Chayton fired twice. The man screamed and fell, and did not move again. "Damn him!" the leader yelled. "Just keep him pinned. Wait for the light." They were trapped. They could hold them off, but they could not escape. Dawn was perhaps an hour away, and the storm was getting closer. The silent, flickering lightning was gone. Now, the sky to the north split open with a jagged, violet spear of light, followed a second later by a low, guttural growl of thunder. The wind, which had been so still, suddenly hit them, a cold, violent gust that smelled of rain and dust. Chayton Nora yelled over the wind, "The storm!" He was already moving, sliding back to her. "They know we are pinned. The storm is our only chance. We have to climb, now, while they are blinded." He grabbed the reins of his buckskin. "Lead Raven. Stay low. Move fast." He fired 3 more shots in rapid succession toward the posse, forcing them to take cover. Under the cover of his own fire, he pulled his horse and scrambled up the rocky incline. Nora was right behind him, pulling the terrified stallion, who was slipping and fighting her on the loose rock. "He is running," the posse leader roared. "He is going up the mesa after him." They began to climb, a desperate, frantic scramble in the dark. The posse was below them, firing wildly. A bullet struck the rock by Chayton's head. Another, fired from below, found a terrible mark. Raven screamed. It was a high, terrified sound of pain that cut through the wind. The stallion stumbled, its front leg buckling. "He is hit," Nora cried, pulling on the reins. "Raven is hit." Chayton was back at her side in an instant. He ran his hand down the horse's leg. Blood was dark on his fingers. "It is a bad one. In the shoulder. He cannot run. He can barely walk." The posse was closing in, their shouts closer. They were climbing, dismounted, coming for the kill. Chayton looked up. The mesa was a sheer, black wall above them. They were trapped. And then the sky exploded. It was not a distant flash. A bolt of lightning, thick as a tree trunk, struck the very top of the mesa. The world turned a brilliant, blinding white, and in the same instant, the thunder crashed. It was not a sound. It was a physical blow, a concussion that shook the earth, shook the rocks, shook the very bones in their bodies. Nora screamed, throwing her hands over her ears, and fell to her knees. The posse below, exposed on the open slope, yelled in terror. The rain came, not in drops, but in a solid, horizontal sheet. This way Chayton roared, pulling her up. He saw it in the lightning flash. A shadow, a hollow, a small cave on the side of the cliff, not 20 feet away. He grabbed Nora by the arm and dragged her toward it. He half carried, half pulled the limping, screaming stallion, pushing the animal with his own body. They fell into the opening, a hollow scooped out of the sandstone by centuries of wind. They were out of the rain. They were out of the line of fire. They were, for a moment, safe. The storm descended. It was a biblical fury. The wind howled like a grieving animal. Lightning struck the mesa again and again, each flash illuminating their tiny refuge in a stark, blue-white glare, followed by instantaneous, deafening thunder. The posse was gone, scattered, driven back down the slope by the raw, celestial power, seeking any cover they could find. Nora was huddled in the back of the cave, which was no more than 10 feet deep. She was shaking from head to toe, her face buried in her hands. She was not just wet and cold. She was paralyzed by a terror that was deeper than the gunfight. Chayton tended to Raven first. The horse was bleeding, but the wound he saw was not as bad as he had feared. The bullet had passed through the thick muscle of the shoulder, missing the bone. It was terrible, but it was not fatal. He packed the wound with the herbs Rosa had given Nora, his hands gentle, his voice a low, constant murmur to the suffering animal. When he was done, he turned to her. She had not moved. She was curled into a tight ball, her body racked with tremors. He could hear her teeth chattering. She had bitten her lower lip, and a thin trickle of blood ran down her chin, but she did not seem to notice. "Eleanor," he said, his voice loud over the storm. She did not respond. She was lost in her fear. He understood. This was not the fear of a woman in danger. This was the old, deep fear of a child. He turned away. He had tinder in a waterproof pouch. He found a spot in the deepest, driest part of the cave, shielded from the wind. He used his knife to shave slivers from a piece of dry juniper he carried. With patient, practiced hands, he struck a spark. A tiny, fragile flame caught, wavered, then held. He fed it, stick by stick, until a small, courageous fire was burning, its light a warm, yellow glow against the violent, blue flashes from outside. The firelight illuminated their faces, casting huge, dancing shadows. He sat on his heels and looked at her, She was still shaking. He did a strange thing. He reached into the fire and took a pinch of cold ash. He scooped a thumbful of the wet, red mud from the cave floor. He mixed them in his palm, a gray-red paste. He moved in front of her. She flinched as his shadow fell over her. "Be still," he said, his voice quiet, but firm. She looked at him, her eyes wide and witless with fear. He reached out and gently, with his thumb, wiped the blood from her chin. Then, he dipped his fingers into the paste. He touched her face. She shuddered, but she did not pull away. His touch was not a man's. It was a priest's. He drew a line across her forehead, from temple to temple. He drew a second line down the bridge of her nose. He took her right hand, which was cold as ice, and drew a spiral in her palm, then closed her fingers over it. What are you doing?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "When I was a boy," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the storm, "my mother would do this before my first hunt, before my first raid. It is a blessing, for protection, to remind the spirits that you belong to the earth, and you are not to be taken lightly." He looked into her eyes, and his were very dark, very old. "It will not stop a bullet. It will not stop the lightning. But my mother said it helps a person remember that they are not alone." Nora stared at him. The firelight was warm. His touch was warm. The symbols on her skin felt like a shield. The shaking in her limbs began to ease. The icy knot of terror in her stomach slowly beginning to unthaw. She looked at the storm, at the lightning that still tore the sky apart. She was still afraid, but the paralyzing, childish terror was gone. He had anchored her. "I have been afraid of storms my whole life," she whispered, her voice raw. "When I was a girl, our house in Boston faced the sea. The storms would come in, and the thunder, it sounded like the sky was breaking." She looked down at her closed hand, at the symbol he had drawn there. "I used to hide under my bed." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "The first time I saw a railroad, I was in a private car with my father. I was watching the fields fly past. It was raining. I was behind thick plate glass. I was safe. I was warm. And I remember thinking, this is freedom, this power, this safety." She laughed, a small, bitter sound. "I was a fool. I was in a cage, watching the world go by. This," she gestured to the mouth of the cave, to the howling wind and the lashing rain. "This is terrifying. I have never been so cold or so scared in my entire life. But I am not in a cage. This is real. It is the first real thing that has ever happened to me." The fire crackled. The storm raged. But in the small, warm cave, the world had shrunk to just the two of them. The space between them was electric, charged with more than just the storm. It was charged with their confessions. He had shared his ritual. She had shared her fear. She reached out, her hand hesitant, and touched his chest, her fingers tracing the outline of the tattoo he had shown her in the sandstorm. She did not ask about it this time. Her touch was a statement. "I see this. I see your pain." He went still. His breath hitched. He looked at her hand, so pale against his dark skin, and then at her face, her eyes clear now and deep. The firelight softened the hard lines of his face, and she saw in him a profound, aching loneliness that matched her own. He slowly raised his own hand. He did not touch her face or her hand. He reached for her throat. His calloused, rough fingers brushed the place where Silas Kane's fingers had been. The bruises were long faded, but the memory was a fresh, ugly wound on her soul. His touch was light as a breath, a question, and a promise of protection. He was not claiming her. He was acknowledging her wound. He saw her pain. She saw him. And in that small, storm-lit cave, there was nothing else. He leaned in. She did not pull away. She met him halfway. Their first kiss was not soft. It was not gentle. It was as raw and elemental as the storm raging outside. It was desperate, and it was necessary. It tasted of rain and smoke and the metallic tang of fear. It was the taste of her bloody lip and the salt of his sweat. Her hands, trembling, came up to grip his shirt, not to pull him closer, but to hold on, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was tearing itself apart. His hand left her throat and moved to her jaw, his fingers tangling in her short, damp hair, holding her steady. It was an anchor. It was two people, shipwrecked and drowning, finding a single piece of driftwood to cling to. It was a promise, made in the heart of the thunder, that they were not, in fact, alone. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. The thunder was a low, distant rumble now, the storm moving east. The rain had softened to a steady, rhythmic drumming. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. They were cold. The fire was burning low, and the air was damp. Chayton looked at his single bedroll, and at the one blanket. He looked at her. He unrolled the thick wool, spreading it on the driest patch of the cave floor. He sat, his back against the rock wall, and held the blanket open. It was an invitation, simple, practical. Nora hesitated for only a second. She moved, huddling beside him, her side pressed against his. He wrapped the blanket around both of them, pulling it tight. The shared warmth was immediate, a profound relief. She was acutely aware of his body, the hard muscle of his thigh against hers, the solid wall of his chest. She could feel his heart beating, a steady, slow rhythm under her ear. He was so still. She could have turned. She could have pressed her mouth to his again. The air was thick with the possibility. But Chayton just stared into the dying fire. He was rigid. He was fighting a battle she could not see. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough, so quiet she could barely hear him. "When I found you," he said, not looking at her, "you were an animal in a trap, terrified, ready to bite, ready to die." He turned his head, and his dark eyes met hers. They were filled with a deep, aching respect. "You are not in the trap anymore, but you are still afraid. Not of the storm, not of me. You are afraid of yourself, of what you have had to become." He reached up and gently touched the red symbol on her forehead, his finger brushing her skin. "When you are no longer afraid of yourself, Eleanor," he whispered, "when you are whole again, that will be the time. Not before." She understood. He was not rejecting her. He was giving her back a choice. He was giving her the respect that Silas Kane, that her father, had never shown her. He was not a captor. He was not a hunter. He was her protector. She did not say anything. She just leaned her head against his shoulder, her body finally relaxing. She felt his arm tighten around her, pulling her closer. Not in passion, but in shared warmth, in simple, profound comfort. Outside, the storm had passed. The rain stopped. The world was washed clean and silent. A final, distant flash of lightning, far to the east, lit the mouth of the cave. It flashed on their faces, on the drying mud on her skin, on the dark, sleeping form of the wounded horse. It flashed on their two forms, huddled together under a single blanket, their hands, somewhere in the darkness, having found each other and clasped tight. The dawn that broke over the mesa was clean, the air washed by the storm. The world looked new, fragile, and intensely beautiful. Nora woke first, her head still resting on Chayton's shoulder. The blanket was warm, and the feeling of safety she felt in his arms was so profound it ached. He was still asleep, his face in repose. The hard lines softened. For a moment, he was not the scout, not the warrior, just a man. She allowed herself to watch him, to memorize the line of his jaw, the thick black of his eyelashes. He woke as he did everything instantly and silently. His eyes opened, dark and clear, and they found hers. The memory of the night, the kiss, the shared confession, hung in the air between them, He did not smile, but the coldness was gone from his gaze. "The posse is gone," he said, his voice a low rumble. He was already listening to the world outside. They scattered, but they will be back, and Maddox will be with them. They moved quickly. Raven's wound was stiff, but the bleeding had stopped. The horse could walk, but slowly. Chayton's buckskin was tired but unharmed. "He cannot be ridden," Nora said, stroking the stallion's neck. "No," Chayton agreed, "and we cannot make it to Santa Fe on one horse, leading another. Maddox will catch us within a day. So what do? "We separate," he said, his face grim. "I will take Raven and lead them north into the high rocks. I can lose them there. You will take the buckskin. You ride east, hard. You will hit the railroad line at Las Calaveras. From there, you can buy a ticket, get to Santa Fe, and find Judge Harper." Nora stared at him. "Separate? Absolutely not. I am not leaving you, and you are not leaving me. We deliver this book together, or we die trying. That is what you said. That was before the horse was shot. It is the only smart play. Eleanor." "It is the stupidest play I have ever heard," she shot back, her fear making her angry. "You will be alone, on a lame horse, hunted by a killer, and I will be alone. A woman with a priceless ledger, trying to buy a train ticket in a town full of men. We will both be dead by nightfall. We are stronger together." "We are slower together." "Then we go to Las Calaveras together," she insisted, her chin set. "Your horse is tired. Raven is hurt. We need a fresh mount. We need food. We might even need papers. We cannot get to Santa Fe on foot. The train is our only chance, and the train is at Las Calaveras. We go there. Together." He argued. He pointed out the risk, the foolishness of walking into a town, a telegraph station, a trap. But she was immovable. She had found her strength in the storm, and she would not be cowed, not even by him. "You are a stubborn woman." "Eleanor Ward," he said finally, a flicker of grudging admiration in his eyes. "I am learning from a stubborn man," she retorted. They descended the mesa at midday, a slow, painful journey. They left Raven hidden in a canyon with enough water and grass, a heartbreaking farewell for Nora. They rode double on the buckskin, pushing the tired animal as hard as they dared, traveling through the gulches and arroyos, staying off the main roads. It took them 2 days, a journey of thirst, hunger, and tense, shared silence. They arrived at Las Calaveras after dark on the second night. The town was a raw, ugly splash of noise and light in the middle of the dark prairie. It was a railroad town, temporary and violent, smelling of fresh-cut lumber, cheap whiskey, and despair. A single muddy street was lined with saloons, tent hotels, and a new, bright red depot for the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe line. "This place is dangerous," Chayton said, his hand on his pistol. "We find the livery, get a fresh horse, buy supplies, and we leave. We ride to the next station. We do not stay here." "We cannot," Nora said, her voice weary. "Look at your horse. He is done. We are done. We need a room, just for a few hours, to eat, to think." He knew she was right. They were both exhausted, running on the memory of adrenaline. To ride on, without rest, was to invite a fatal mistake. They found an inn at the far end of the street, away from the loudest saloons. The sign read, "The Prospector's Rest." It was a 2-story wooden building, poorly built, but it had solid walls. The proprietor was a thin, weasel-faced man named Harris, his eyes quick and greedy. He praised Chayton's dine heritage, Nora's strange costume of a dirty linen shirt and a dine skirt, and the visible exhaustion on both of them. "Got 1 room left," he said, wiping his hands on a filthy apron. "Costs you $5, in advance, and $1 for the horse." It was robbery, but Chayton paid, the gold coin vanishing into the man's pocket. "We need food, and a bath," Chayton said. "My wife will bring water. Food's extra." A woman came from the back. She was thin and pale, with faded blonde hair and a map of old bruises on her face that she did not try to hide. She looked at Nora, and her eyes, unlike her husband's, were not greedy. They were just tired. A deep, bone-weary sympathy passed between the two women. "I will bring up the water. Martha, the man," Harris snapped. "You get them the stew, and be quick about it." The room was small, cold, and smelled of mildew, but it had a door with a lock and a bed. Nora sat on the lumpy mattress, her entire body trembling with fatigue. Chayton stood at the single window, peering down into the muddy street, his body rigid, his senses still on high alert. The woman, Martha, brought a tray. It held a single large bowl of steaming stew and 2 spoons. She set it down, her eyes finding Nora's. "Be careful here." "Miss," she whispered, so low Chayton could not hear. "My husband. He sees everything. He listens. He has a friend at the telegraph office. Be careful." She slipped out of the room, leaving the warning hanging in the air. Nora looked at the stew. It was thick with potatoes and a little meat, and it smelled like heaven. They had not had a hot meal in days. "Chayton," she said softly, "come and eat. You cannot stand watching forever." He turned from the window, but he did not move toward the bed. "She is right. This place is a trap. I can feel it. As soon as the horse is rested, we are leaving." "I know, but not now. Now, we eat." She motioned to the bowl. He came and sat, not on the bed, but on the floor, his back to the wall, his rifle within arm's reach. Nora sat on the edge of the mattress. They shared the bowl, passing it back and forth, their spoons clicking. The simple, hot food was a profound comfort. It was an act of peace, a moment of domesticity so normal it felt surreal. "When this is over," Nora said quietly, scraping the last of the stew from the bowl, "what will you do?" He was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. "I do not know. Go back to my people. I suppose, if they are not scattered, if they are not all dead. And if this ledger works," she pressed, "if the judge listens, if they stop Cain." He looked up, and his eyes were tired. "The world does not change that fast. Eleanor, they will stop Cain, and another man will come, and another. There is always another man who wants what is in the ground. Then we have to change it," she said, her voice fierce with a new, fragile hope. "It is not just about mine. It is about the ledger, the slaves, the men he buried. If a judge sees that, it is not just about land. It is about murder. It is about justice." Justice is a rich man's word. "It should not be," she said. "When this is over, I am not going back to Boston. I am staying. I am going to build a school, like the one Lena wanted, for the dying children, for the Mexican children, for the white children, too, so they can all learn to read, so they can learn to read the contracts before they sign them." He stared at her, at this woman who, a week ago, had been a terrified girl in a silk dress. He saw the fire in her, the steel he had only glimpsed. He saw a future he had not dared to imagine. "A school," he said, testing the word. "Why not?" she smiled, a small, weary smile. "You could help. You know the land. You know the people. You speak all the languages." "I am a tracker. Eleanor, a killer, not a teacher." "You taught me how to survive a sandstorm," she said softly. "You taught me what bravery is. I think you are already a teacher." He looked away, his throat tight, unmanned by her simple, absurd faith in him. He stood up and went back to the window, his heart aching. Downstairs, in the dark, cramped office, Harris was writing on a piece of paper. "Marshal Pike, Las Piedras office. Have the half-breed and the boy thief. Room 2, Prospector's Rest. Come quick, reward." He folded the paper and handed it to a grubby boy. "Take this to the telegraph station. Do not let anyone see you." At 4 a.m, the darkness was absolute. A cold, fine rain had begun to fall. Nora was asleep, fully clothed, on top of the covers. Chayton was not. He was sitting in the chair by the window, his rifle across his knees, dozing but not sleeping, his senses strained. He heard it, not a sound, but a change, a wrongness, the creak of a floorboard in the hall that did not belong to the building settling. He was on his feet, his hand over Nora's mouth, before she was even awake. "Quiet," he breathed. "They are here." Her eyes flew open, wide with terror. She understood instantly. The door did not just open, it exploded. The cheap pine lock burst, and the door slammed open, kicked in by a heavy boot. 3 men filled the doorway. 2 were deputies, their faces shadowed, their pistols raised. The 3rd man, the one in the center, was tall and thin, wearing a long, oilskin duster. He had a pale, narrow face and dead, colorless eyes. It was Cole Maddox. "Well, well," Maddox whispered, his voice a dry rustle. "The traitor and his pet. Get them." Chayton did not hesitate. He shoved Nora off the bed, onto the floor, and brought his rifle up. He was too slow. One of the deputies lunged, not firing, but smashing the barrel of his own pistol across Chayton's face. The blow was brutal, heavy. Chayton staggered back, blood exploding from his nose. He roared, a sound of pure rage, and lunged, his knife in his hand. But Maddox was ready. He stepped forward and swung a heavy, leather-wrapped sap. It struck Chayton on the side of the head with a sickening, wet thud. Chayton's eyes rolled back. He collapsed, his limbs loose, and fell to the floor like a sack of stones. "No!" Nora screamed. She scrambled for Chayton's fallen rifle, but one of the deputies kicked it away and grabbed her by the hair, hauling her to her feet. "Get your hands off her," Maddox ordered. The deputy let go. Nora stood trembling, her eyes fixed on Chayton's still, bloody form on the floor. He was not moving. "He is dead," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Not yet," Maddox said. "Mr. Kane wants him alive. For the hanging." The door to the hall opened again. This time, the man who entered was not a gunman. He was immaculate, his black broadcloth coat unwrinkled, his boots polished. Silas Kane walked into the filthy room, his cold, gray eyes taking in the scene. He looked at the broken door, at the bloody, unconscious form of Chayton, and then at Nora. He smiled, a thin, satisfied expression. "Eleanor, my dear," he said, his voice calm, as if they were in her father's library. "What a mess you have made. You look appalling." "You are a monster," she spat, her entire body shaking with hatred. Kane only chuckled. He walked over to her. The deputy who had grabbed her tensed, but Kane ignored him. He reached out and, with his gloved finger, gently touched her cheek. She flinched, but she did not pull away. She was frozen in terror. "You have been a very foolish girl," he said, "running away, consorting with savages, stealing my property." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "But do not worry. It is all over. We will return to Boston. I will marry you, as planned. We will tell your father and the press that you suffered a small mental breakdown, a female fragility. This savage confused you, kidnapped you, but I, your devoted fiancé, have rescued you." "I will tell them the truth," she hissed. "Will you?" Kane's eyes were cold as ice. "Who will they believe, a hysterical, compromised woman, or me?" He looked down at Chayton. "As for him, his fate is much simpler. Marshal Pike has a warrant. For kidnapping a white woman. For inciting the Navajo. For murder. He will hang. Eleanor, in the public square. And you will watch." He turned to the deputies. "Get him out of here. Put him in the town jail. He hangs at noon. Take her, too. Put her in the cell next to him. I want her to hear him think about what he has done." The deputies hauled Chayton's limp body up, dragging him out the door. Maddox grabbed Nora's arm. his fingers biting into her skin like claws. "Move!" They dragged her down the stairs. Through the silent, dark inn, Harris, the proprietor, was watching from his office, his weasel face alight with greed. They marched her down the muddy street. The rain was falling harder now. The jail was a small, solid stone building next to the marshal's office. A deputy unlocked the heavy door, and Maddox shoved Nora inside. The front room was empty, save for a desk. There were 2 cells in the back. They threw Chayton into one, his body hitting the stone floor with a groan. He was still unconscious. Maddox shoved Nora toward the second cell. As she passed the filthy, rickety desk, she acted. It was a desperate, insane gamble. With her free hand, the one Maddox was not holding, she reached inside her shirt and pulled out the leather ledger. In one swift motion, as she stumbled, she slipped it under the desk, pushing it deep into the shadows where the floorboards were uneven and dark. Maddox shoved her into the cell. "Not seeing? Get in there and think about your new life. Miss Ward." He slammed the heavy barred door and locked it. He and the deputies left, leaving a single smoking lantern on the desk. Nora was alone in the dark, with the sound of the rain and the low, agonizing groan from the man in the cell next to her. In the street, a small, thin boy, no older than 10, watched the deputies leave. He was little Thomas, the inn's bootblack. He had been sleeping in the stable, and he had seen everything. He had seen the deputies arrive. He had seen them drag the Indian tracker out, his face a mask of blood. He had seen them lock the girl in the jail. Tomas hated Marshal Pike. He hated Kane. He hated all of them. He ran, his bare feet silent in the mud, not to his bed, but to the edge of town, to a small, dark shack made of scrap lumber and canvas. He knocked on the door, a secret rhythm. It was opened by an old woman, her face as wrinkled as a dried apple, her eyes as black and sharp as obsidian. She was an old Paiute woman, a shaman, despised by the town but feared by it, too. "What is it, child?" she rasped. "They have him," Thomas panted. "They have the tracker, the one who works with the dine, and they have the girl, Maddox and Kane. They are going to hang him." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "Kane." She spat the name. "The man who builds his railroad on the bones of our children." Her own son had died in Kane's tunnel collapse, the one Nora had read about in the ledger. He was one of the unregistered. "Get me the oil," the old woman said to Thomas, her voice a cold whisper. "And the matches, a hanging needs a fire. We will give them one." The storm hit its peak an hour before dawn. The cold rain turned to sleet, driven by a howling wind. In the town jail, Nora was pressed against the bars, whispering Chayton's name. He was finally moving, groaning, trying to sit up. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice thick with pain. "Where?" "In the jail. They are going to hang you. Oh, God! Chayton, you are bleeding." "The ledger," he choked out, ignoring his own pain. "Did they get the ledger?" "No," she whispered, her voice triumphant. "No, I hid it. It is under the desk." He slumped back, a small, pained laugh escaping him. "Good, good girl." That was when they heard the scream. Fire at the livery. Through the small, barred window, the sky was no longer black. It was a pulsing, furious orange. The stable, where the deputies and Maddox had left their horses, was engulfed in flames. The bell in the town's tiny church began to ring. A frantic, clanging alarm. Men shouted, running through the mud. The 2 deputies guarding the jail cursed, unlocked the front door, and ran out to help save the horses. They left the door unlocked, open to the night. A moment later, a small shadow slipped inside. It was little Tomas. He ran to Chayton's cell, holding up a heavy ring of keys. The old woman started the fire. He whispered, his hands shaking as he tried to find the right key. She said it was a gift. He found the key and unlocked Chayton's cell. Chayton stumbled out, using the bars for support. He was dazed. His head split open, his vision swimming, but he was on his feet. "The girl," he rasped. Tomas ran to Nora's cell and unlocked it. She flew out, grabbing Chayton, supporting him with her shoulder. "We have to go," she urged. "The ledger. I have to get the ledger." She dove under the desk, her hands finding the book, and shoved it back into her shirt. The front door opened. It was not a deputy. It was Cole Maddox. He stood in the doorway, his duster slick with rain, his pale eyes glowing in the firelight. He had not gone to the fire. He was a hunter, and he never left his kill. "Going somewhere," he whispered. He raised his pistol. Chayton reacted on pure instinct. He shoved Nora so hard she fell back into the open cell, out of the line of fire. He lunged at Maddox, not as a man, but as a wounded bear. He was too slow. Maddox fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. Chayton grunted, the bullet tearing through his side, spinning him around. But his lunge had carried him forward. He crashed into Maddox, his knife, which they had not taken, in his hand. The two men fell out the door, into the muddy street, lit by the roaring fire from the stables. It was a primal, brutal fight. Maddox had his pistol, but Chayton was too close. Chayton had his knife, but he was wounded, dazed. They rolled in the mud, pounding at each other with fists. Maddox was cold, precise, his blows finding Chayton's wounds. Chayton was fighting on pure, blinding rage. He drove his head up into Maddox's face. He heard the man's nose break. Maddox screamed and raised his pistol to use as a club. Chayton saw the opening. He drove his knife up, under the man's ribs. With all the strength he had left, he put his shoulder into it, driving it to the hilt. Cole Maddox froze. His pale eyes went wide. Surprised, he looked down at the knife buried in his chest. He looked at Chayton. A small, bloody sigh escaped his lips, and he went limp. Chayton pushed the body off him and tried to stand. He got to his knees, but he could not get further. He was bleeding, badly, from his head and from his side. Nora ran out, her hand to her mouth. She grabbed him, pulling him up. "Chayton, oh God, you are hurt! We have to—" They heard a sound. A long, mournful whistle. The freight train, the one they had planned to take, was preparing to leave. The fire, the chaos, had made it leave early. "The train!" Chayton gasped, leaning on her, his blood hot on her shoulder. "Eleanor! The train! We have to—" They stumbled, half ran, half fell through the mud, past the shouting men, past the burning stable. No one saw them. All eyes were on the fire. The train was moving, chugging slowly, picking up speed. They reached the tracks. An open boxcar was rolling past. "I cannot," Chayton gasped, his legs buckling. "Yes, you can," Nora screamed. She shoved him, using her shoulder, her entire body. He got a hand on the edge of the car. She pushed him from behind, with a strength she did not know she possessed. He rolled, bonelessly, into the dark, open car. The car was moving faster. Nora ran alongside it, her lungs burning. She grabbed the iron handle. Her feet slipped in the mud. For a heart-stopping second, she was dragged. Then, a hand grabbed her wrist. Chayton. He was lying on the floor of the car, but he had reached for her. He held on, his grip like iron, and she used his strength to haul herself up, tumbling into the darkness beside him. They were safe. They were alive. They were moving. Nora knelt over him, her hands hovering over the new, dark stain spreading across his side. "You are bleeding," she whispered, her voice breaking. He just looked at her, his face pale in the darkness, his eyes finding hers. The train whistle screamed, a long, triumphant cry as it pulled out of Las Calaveras, leaving the fire and the mud and the body of Cole Maddox behind. Chayton closed his eyes. The boxcar was pitch black, and it smelled of straw, old grain, and the metallic, coppery scent of Chayton's blood. The train's whistle screamed again, a long, mournful sound that was, for them, a cry of freedom. The carriage rattled and swayed, the wheels clacking over the rails, a rhythmic, pounding heartbeat carrying them away from Las Calaveras. Nora knelt over him, her hands shaking so badly she could barely think. She was in the dark, with a dying man, in a moving crate. "Chayton," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh God, Chayton, stay with me." He groaned, a low, animal sound of pain. He was lying on his back, his side a spreading, hot pool of liquid. "The lantern," he gasped, his teeth clenched. "On the desk. Did you—" "No," she choked out, her mind racing. There was no time. She had no light. She could not see the wound. She could not see his face. She could only feel the alarming, sticky warmth. She tore a long strip from the hem of her dine skirt. It was not clean, but it was all she had. "Where?" she asked, her hands hovering over him. "Where did he hit you?" Sighed. He breathed. "It went through, I think." Her fingers, clumsy in the dark, found the entry wound. It was a hot, ragged hole in his side, just above his hip. She pressed the cloth against it. "Hard." He cried out, his whole body arching in agony, and then went limp. "I am sorry," she sobbed, tears tracking through the grime on her face. "I am sorry, I am sorry." "Do not be sorry," he whispered, his voice faint. "Be smart. We are not safe, not yet. We are on a train. Chayton, we are moving. We got away. Kane," he breathed. "He is not like Maddox. He does not just kill, he plans, he builds. He will not let that ledger go." He was right. She had won the battle with the dog, but the snake was still out there. "He will go to Santa Fe," she reasoned, trying to think. "He will try to get to the judge before we do." "No," Chayton said, his voice stronger, his mind clearing through the haze of pain. "He is smarter than that. He will not let us reach Santa Fe. He knows the route. He knows the land." A cold dread settled over her, heavier than the darkness. "What do you mean?" "The canyon," he gasped, his hand gripping her wrist, his fingers surprisingly strong. "Bitse yit ai. The canyon of the ancestors. The one, his mine." "What about it?" "The railroad. It goes right over it, on a bridge, a new one, built of wood." The implication hit her like a physical blow. "He will be there. He will be waiting for us." "He will not be waiting," Chayton rasped. "He will destroy the bridge. He will destroy the train. He will destroy the evidence. All of it. The ledger, us, and any witnesses." Nora went cold. The train was not a sanctuary. It was a long, wooden coffin, rattling toward a trap. And it was not just them. She thought of the engineers in the engine, the brakemen in the caboose. She had heard other voices, other men, farther up the train. They were on a freight train. But it was not empty. "We have to stop the train," she said, her voice frantic. "Not yet. Not here." He was thinking, his mind sharp, his body failing. "We are still in the lowlands. If we stop here, his men, the posse, they will find us. We have no horse. I cannot walk. We have to wait. We have to get closer to the canyon." "Closer? That is insane. He will kill us all." "Lena," he said, the name a faint breath. "When we left, I told her if we were separated to send a signal, to watch the canyon. It is our sacred place. She will have watchers there. It is our only chance." He was putting his faith in a smoke signal, in a desperate last-minute plea. It was all they had. "All right," Nora said, her voice steadying. She had his life, and hers, and the lives of the men on this train in her hands. She had to be strong. "What do I do?" "Good," he breathed. He was fading, his voice weaker. "You have to be my eyes. The door, it slides. Open it. Just a crack." She fumbled in the dark, her hands finding the heavy wooden bar. It was thick, but it was not locked from the outside. She put her shoulder into it, grunting with the effort, and slid the heavy door open perhaps 6 inches. A sliver of cold, gray light cut the darkness. The pre-dawn was breaking. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a bruised purple color. The train was moving fast, the landscape a blur of wet sagebrush and dark, low hills. "On the wall," Chayton whispered, his voice thin. "The emergency brake, a red handle. Do you see it?" Nora looked. There, on the wall of the boxcar, was a long metal lever, painted a faded red. "I see it." "When I tell you, you pull it hard, with all your weight. It will stop the train, but it will be violent. Hold on." "And then what?" "The roof," he gasped. "A ladder. On the outside. You have to climb. You have to see what is at the bridge. I cannot see from here." He was asking her to climb onto the roof of a moving train, a train that might be blown up at any moment. She looked at him, at his pale, bloody face. He was in agony, but his eyes were clear, and they were fixed on her. He was trusting her. "All right," she said, "I will." She ripped more cloth from her skirt, making a thick, tight pressure bandage for his wound. She tied it as hard as she could, hissing an apology as he grunned Ted in pain. She gave him a drink from their canteen, washing the blood from his lips. "Rest," she whispered. "I will watch." For an hour, she sat at the crack in the door, her world reduced to that 6-inch sliver of gray, passing landscape. The train climbed, the rhythm of the engine changing, the wheels straining. They were entering the high country, the land of mesas and canyons. Chayton had drifted into a restless, pained unconsciousness beside her. And then she saw it. Far ahead, the tracks curved, and for a moment, she could see miles into the distance. She saw the great gaping maw of the Bitse Yit Ai, the sacred canyon. And she saw the bridge. It was a spider's web of new, yellow pine stretching across the chasm. And on the near side of the bridge, on a high ledge overlooking the tracks, she saw a flicker of light, a torch, then another, and she saw men, dark shapes moving, horses tethered. "Chayton!" she screamed, shaking him. "They are there! They are at the bridge! I see torches!" His eyes snapped open, his body tensing, his mind instantly alert. The dynamite! How close are we? "I do not know, a mile, 2 miles. "We cannot stop here," he said, his voice urgent. "Too far. They will ride us down. We have to get closer. Close enough for the workers on the train to see. Close enough for my people." "How close? Chayton, how close do we dare?" "Wait," he commanded. He was listening, his head tilted. "Wait, wait." The train barreled forward, the sound of the wheels a thunderous, oncoming doom. Nora was paralyzed, her hand on the red lever, her eyes fixed on the approaching bridge. She could see the men clearly now. 4 of them. 5. She saw a man unspooling a wire. Now Chayton roared. Nora threw her entire weight onto the lever. She grabbed it with both hands and pulled. The metal groaned, and then, with a terrifying, metallic scream, the brakes engaged. The boxcar pitched forward violently. Nora was thrown against the wall, her head striking the wood. The train did not stop. It decelerated with a grinding, shrieking howl of metal on metal, the wheels sparking, the entire world shuddering. Crates in the car toppled over. The train slid, its momentum a terrible, dying force. It slid for 1/4 of a mile, and it stopped. It stopped with a final, groaning jolt, the engine hissing, the sudden silence deafening. The front of the engine was no more than 300 yards from the wooden trestle bridge. Shouts erupted from the front of the train. Men were yelling. A passenger car, one she had not known was there, attached to the back of the freight, had its doors thrown open. Passengers, ranch hands, miners, their faces pale with panic, were tumbling out. "What is it? What happened?" "We are being robbed." Then, a rifle shot cracked from the ridge. A bullet sang over the train. "Ambush!" a man shouted. On the ridge, Silas Kane stood next to Marshal Pike. His face was a mask of cold fury. He stopped the train. How did he stop the train? "It does not matter," Pike snarled, raising his rifle. "They are trapped. Kill them all. Light the fuse." One of the men on the ridge ran toward the dynamite, a torch in his hand. "Get out!" Chayton gasped, pushing at Nora. "Take the ledger. Run! Hide in the rocks. Get to the judge." "No," she yelled, pulling him up. "I am not leaving you. We are in this together." A burly man in overalls, the train's brakeman, slid their boxcar door open, his eyes wide with panic. "What the hell is going on? Who pulled the brake?" "They are trying to blow the bridge," Nora screamed at him, pointing, "Up there with dynamite." The brakeman's face went white. He looked up. He saw the men, the rifles, the fuse. He did not hesitate. "Boys," he bellowed to the other workers. "They are going to blow us all to hell. Grab your rifles. We have to stop them." The train workers, tough men who built the line, did not run. They grabbed rifles from the caboose, taking cover behind the train wheels, behind the rocks that lined the track. "You have to get to cover," Nora said, pulling on Chayton's arm. He was leaning on her, his face gray with pain. He had lost too much blood. "The rocks," he whispered, gesturing to a jumble of boulders not 50 feet from the train. They stumbled out of the boxcar, into the cold, gray dawn. A bullet kicked up dirt at their feet. Nora half-dragged him, his arm draped over her shoulder. They fell behind the largest boulder, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The battle began. It was chaos. Pike and his men were firing from the ridge, their position superior. The train workers were pinned down, firing back, their bullets thudding uselessly into the hillside. "We are trapped," the brakeman yelled, crouching near them. "They will pick us off one by one, and then they will blow the bridge anyway." Chayton was leaning against the rock, his pistol in his hand. He was too weak to lift his rifle. He was watching the rocks, not the men on the ridge. He was watching the high cliffs on the other side of the canyon. "Where are they? Lena," he whispered to himself. "Where are you?" "Pike," he yelled, his voice surprisingly strong. "Marshal Pike." The shooting slowed. Pike's voice echoed from the ridge. "Greyhawk, you should have died in Las Calaveras. Give us the girl in the book, and I might let these other men live." "The book is right here," Marshal Nora screamed, her voice clear and strong in the cold air. She stood up from behind the boulder, holding the leather ledger high above her head. "Nora, no!" Chayton yelled, trying to pull her down. A rifle cracked. From Kane, not Pike. He was aiming at her. The shot came, not from the ridge, but from the rocks beside her. Chayton had moved. He had used the last of his strength to throw his body in front of hers. The bullet, meant for her heart, struck him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He grunted, a sound of pained surprise, and collapsed. He did not just fall. He slid, his body rolling down the loose gravel at the edge of the track, stopping at the very lip of the great canyon. "Chayton!" Nora screamed, a sound of pure animalistic agony. She scrambled after him, oblivious to the bullets. She saw him lying still, his face pale, his eyes closed, his blood mixing with the red sand at the edge of the precipice. She thought he was dead. The world went silent for her, but not for anyone else. From the high cliffs, on both sides of the canyon, a sound arose. It was a high, thin wail, a war cry. And then, as if they had sprung from the rock itself, figures appeared. Dine warriors, their faces painted, their rifles ready. They were not rabble. They were a disciplined fighting force. Lena had not just brought watchers. She had brought an army. They opened fire, not on the train, but on the ridge. Pike's men were caught in a perfect, devastating crossfire. The hunters had become the hunted. "Where did they come from?" Pike roared, his men falling around him. But Silas Kane was not watching the battle. His eyes were on Nora, who was kneeling over Chayton's body. He had lost. The ledger was gone. The mine was gone. His railroad, his reputation, his future. It was all gone. All because of her. He raised his pistol, his face a mask of insane, cold hatred. He would have this one. Last victory. He aimed at the back of her head. He did not hear the man yelling, the one he had sent to light the fuse. It is lit, but it is wrong. The rock is unstable. The dynamite, which Kane had ordered placed to shatter the bridge supports, had been gassed in a fissure. The small charge, set by panicked men in a hurry, did not just explode. It detonated the entire unstable rock face. There was a groaning, tearing sound. The ground on the ridge shuddered. Silas Kane turned, his pistol still raised, his eyes wide with surprise, as the entire ledge he was standing on gave way. The rock and the men on it fell into the canyon. Kane did not scream. He was silent, his black coat flapping, as he fell 1,000 feet into the dark, rushing river at the bottom of the canyon. He was swallowed by the very earth he had sought to violate. The battle was over. The surviving deputies threw down their guns. Marshal Pike stood alone, his hands raised, surrounded by dying warriors and angry railroad men. He was shaking. Nora had not seen any of it. She was holding Chayton in her arms, his head in her lap. He was not dead. His eyes were open, just a slit, and he was looking at her. "Nora," she said, her tears falling on his face. "Do not leave me. Please, do not leave me." Marshal Pike, his hands bound, was being marched past them. He looked at Nora, his face a snarl of hatred. "You," he spat, "you and your savage lover. You have ruined everything, but you will not win. The law." Nora looked up. Her face was a mask of cold, pure rage. She pulled Chayton's pistol from his holster. She stood up, walked over to Pike, and pressed the muzzle of the gun directly under his chin. The warriors, the workers, they all stopped. "The law," Nora whispered, her voice shaking with fury. "You want to talk about the law?" She held up the ledger, which she had never let go. "Here is the law. Marshal, the law you broke, the men you helped murder, the land you helped steal." She turned to the brakeman, who was standing nearby, his face pale. "Can you read?" "Yes, ma'am," he stammered. She threw the book at him. Read it all. And then you take it to Judge Harper. You tell him what you saw here." She turned back to Pike, the gun still steady. He was sweating, his eyes wide with terror. He was going to die. "You are not worth the bullet," Nora said, her voice dead. She lowered the gun. "You will not hang. That is too easy. You will live, and you will go to prison, and you will listen to every word of the testimony against you. You will live to see us win." She turned her back on him and ran back to Chayton. She knelt, cradling him. He was fading. The new wound in his shoulder was bad, but the one in his side was worse. His blood was all over her. "Chayton," she begged. He raised a hand, his fingers weak, and touched the red, drying mud on her forehead, the symbol he had drawn in the cave. "Mesa," he whispered, his voice a thread. "The storm, the night rain." "I remember," she sobbed. "I remember." "Good," he breathed. His eyes found hers and held them. "Remember, you belong to you. Not to your father, not to Kane, not to me. You belong to you." His hand fell from her face. "If I live, Eleanor," he whispered, the words so faint she had to lean down to hear them. "If I live, I will walk with you." His eyes closed. His breath shuddered. And then it stopped. The world went silent. The air in Santa Fe was thin and sharp, smelling of piñon smoke and dust. It was the air of a place perched between the desert and the sky, in a quiet, sunlit room in a house off the main plaza. Chayton Greyhawk slowly returned to the world. He was in a real bed, with clean, white sheets. His entire chest and side were wrapped in thick, white bandages. Every breath was a fresh, sharp argument with his own body. But he was breathing, and he was alive. He had been in this room for 2 weeks. He had vague, fevered memories of the journey after the canyon. Nora, her face a pale, grim mask, ordering the railroad men to put him on the train. The brakeman, the one she had given the ledger to, cleared a space for him in the caboose, making a bed of mail sacks. The agonizing, jolting ride. A man with a rough, kind face meeting them at the Santa Fe depot. A man the brakeman had called Doctor. Dr. Elias Thorne was a former Army surgeon who had seen more gunshot wounds than he cared to remember. He had looked at the 2 wounds on Chayton, the ragged tear in his side and the new, terrible hole in his shoulder, and had shaken his head. He had given him a 50-50 chance, at best. But the bullets had missed his heart and his lungs. They had taken blood and meat, but not his life. He had been lucky. Or, as the old Dine women would say, the spirits had not been ready for him. Nora sat at a small, scarred wooden desk near the window. Sunlight poured over her, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She was writing, her hand, holding the pen, still trembled. Not from fear, not anymore. It trembled from the sheer, exhausting weight of memory. She was writing her testimony for Judge Harper. She had to write it all down, every word, every touch, the way Silas Kane had gripped her chin in the library, his voice a cold whisper, the feel of his fingers on her throat, the casual, terrifying display of ownership. She had to write about the conversation she overheard, the cold, business-like talk of her father and Kane, planning her life as if it were a railroad charter. She had to write about the escape, the terror of the stagecoach, the sandstorm, the fight in the pass. She had to write about the ledger, about the names of the men buried in the tunnel, about the payments to Marshall Pike. With every word she wrote, she was taking the shame he had tried to put on her and turning it into an accusation. She was taking her terror and forging it into a weapon. She was no longer a victim, running. She was a witness, standing still. The territorial courthouse in Santa Fe was in the old palace of the governors, a long adobe building that had seen Spanish viceroys, Mexican governors, and now, American judges. The courtroom was packed. It was a sea of faces, railroad workers in their overalls, miners, ranchers, finely dressed ladies from the Capitol, and, in the back, a silent, watchful group of Dine, led by Lena. Don Miguel and Rosa were there, having ridden for 2 days. Little Tomas was there, his eyes wide, sitting next to an old, imposing Paiute woman he called grandmother. At the front, Judge Cyrus Harper presided. He was an old man, thin as a rail, with a shock of white hair and eyes as blue and cold as a mountain lake. He believed in God, and he believed in the Constitution, and he held all other human endeavors in deep suspicion. Then they brought in Marshall Pike. He was in chains, his uniform filthy, his face gray and stubbled. He looked not at the judge, but at the crowd, his eyes darting, looking for a friendly face, and finding none. "This is not a trial," Judge Harper's voice boomed, cutting through the silence. "This is a federal hearing. We are here to determine if the laws of the United States have been violated in this territory. We are here to examine the evidence concerning the collapse of the Kane Consolidated Rail Line and the death of its proprietor, Silas Kane." The hearing lasted for 2 days. It was not a trial, it was an avalanche. The brakeman, a man named Henderson, was called first. He identified the ledger. He read, in his simple, clear voice, the entries Nora had marked, the payments to Pike, the list of indebted Chinese laborers, and the final, Damming entry incident at Tunnel 4. 7 men lost, unregistered. Report filed minor blasting accident, no casualties. Expense $100 to Marshal Pike. For silence. A low, angry murmur went through the courtroom. Don Miguel and Rosa took the stand. They told of Cole Maddox, of the $500 bounty, of the hunt for Chayton and the boy. Little Tomas, his voice small but clear, told of the fire and of unlocking the jail. He pointed at Pike. He was working for them. He let them beat the tracker. I saw it. Then, the old Paiute woman from Las Calaveras, who gave her name only as Mother Coyote, stood up. She spoke in her own language, Lena translating, her voice ringing with a cold, clear fury. She told the court that her son, her only son, had gone to work for Kane. He was one of the unregistered. He was one of the 7 men buried in Tunnel 4. She held up a small, beaded pouch. Silas Kane did not just steal silver, she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. He stole my son. He stole the sons of 6 other women. He built his metal road on their bones. There is no law for that, except the law of the earth, which has already claimed him. Finally, Pike himself was called. He was sweating, his bluster gone. He tried to cower. He tried to blame everything on his superiors. I was just following orders, Kane. He was a powerful man, he and Senator Ward. Senator Ward is not on trial here. Marshal, Judge Harper cut him off, his voice like ice. You are. Did you or did you not accept $1,000 to conceal the deaths of 7 men? It was not, it was a bonus. For hazardous duty, Pike stammered. A bonus, Judge Harper repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. For silence. He looked at the ledger, then at Pike. And you took a further bounty to hunt a woman, Eleanor Ward, and the man protecting her, knowing your employer, Silas Kane, meant to murder them both. No, I was serving a warrant for kidnapping the half-breed. He took her. That is a lie, Nora's voice said. She was standing. She had not been called, but she stood. That is a lie. All eyes turned to her. She was wearing a simple, borrowed dress. Her short, jagged hair was clean. Her face was pale, but her eyes were on fire. My name is Eleanor Ward, she said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the room. I was not kidnapped. I was running from Silas Kane, who assaulted me in my father's house. I was running from my father, who tried to sell me like a piece of livestock. I was running from this man, Marshal Pike, who took Kane's money to hunt me down and return me to my abuser. Chayton Greyhawk did not kidnap me. He saved my life. He is a hero. And these men, she pointed at Pike, they are the criminals. She sat down. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Harper looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Pike. He did not need to deliberate. He raised his gavel and struck it once. The sound was like a rifle shot. This court finds as follows. He declared, this court finds that a criminal conspiracy existed, led by the late Silas Kane and aided by Marshal John Pike, to defraud the United States government, to engage in the illegal practice of indentured servitude, and to conceal the deaths of at least 7 men. These are federal crimes. He pointed at Pike. You are stripped of your title. You are to be held in federal custody, to be tried for conspiracy, for attempted murder, and for the murder of those 7 men. Pike collapsed, his face ashen, as 2 soldiers took him by the arms and dragged him from the room. Judge Harper was not finished. Furthermore, he said, his voice ringing with authority, this court orders the immediate seizure of all assets of the Kane Consolidated Railroad Line, pending a federal investigation. The charter to build through the Bitsa Yit-Ai Canyon is hereby revoked, permanently. A sound, a low cheer, came from the dine in the back. And finally, the judge continued, his gaze softening as it fell on Nora. This court recognizes Miss Eleanor Ward not as a fugitive, but as a material witness and a whistleblower of great courage. Her testimony, and the evidence she procured at great personal risk, has brought this conspiracy to light. He looked directly at her. "Miss Ward, this court is aware of your family connections. I am issuing a federal order of protection in your name. You are under the jurisdiction of this court. No one, not your father, not his agents, not anyone, has the right to remove you from this territory, or from your own free will. You are, as of this moment, your own woman." Case closed. That night, Chayton woke. The room was dark, save for the blue moonlight streaming through the window. He was alone, and then he was not. He sensed her before he saw her. Nora was asleep in the chair beside his bed. Her head was down on the mattress, her arm resting beside him. Her hand was closed around his. He looked at their joined hands, her pale and fine-boned, covered in healing cuts, his dark and scarred. He felt the warmth of her, the simple, solid presence of her, and it was a more powerful medicine than anything the doctor had given him. He lay there for a long time, just breathing, just feeling her hand in his. He was too weak to move, but he was content. He looked out the window. In the dusty yard below, lit by the moon, he saw a figure. It was Lena. She was standing under a cottonwood tree, and with her were 3 children. He recognized little Thomas. The other 2 were a small Dine girl and a white boy with tow-headed hair, the doctor's son. Lena was pointing at the sky, at the constellations, and she was speaking. The 3 children were listening, their faces upturned, rapt. A school. Nora stirred, her hand tightening in his. She woke slowly, lifting her head, her hair a wild, short mess. She looked at him, her eyes clouded with sleep, and then they cleared. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. It was the first time he had ever seen her truly smile. "You are awake?" she whispered. "I am awake," he said, his voice a rough croak. They did not speak for a long time. They just looked at each other, their hands clasped. "It is over," she said finally. "Pike is in jail. The railroad is seized. The canyon, your canyon, it is safe. Judge Harper declared it a reserve. For your people." He closed his eyes. A single, hot tear escaped and tracked down his temple. He had not won. She had, this small, brave woman. She had done what he, with all his strength, all his skill, could not. She had brought justice. "You did it, Eleanor," he whispered. "We did it," she corrected softly. A few days later, he was sitting up in bed, his chest still a landscape of pain, but his strength was returning. He had a visitor, a man in a crisp blue uniform, a colonel from the local fort. The colonel was polite, respectful. He praised Chayton's courage. He praised his actions at the canyon, and then he made the offer. "The territory needs men like you. Greyhawk, men who understand both sides. The current Indian agent at Fort Defiance is being removed. Thanks to your ledger, we want you to take the post. We want you to be the new liaison, to be the go-between for the Army and the Dine. It pays well. It is an important job." Chayton looked at the colonel, his face a hard, unreadable mask. An Indian agent, the job of the men who had stolen from his people, the men who had let them starve. "No," Chayton said. "Son, this is a great opportunity. I sold myself to the Army once before," Chayton said, his voice cold. "I wore your blue coat. I led your soldiers. I will not do it again. Get out." The colonel, his face stiff with surprise, left the room. Nora, who had been standing by the window, turned to him. She was not angry. She understood. "I know what you are thinking," she said softly. "You are thinking of the men who betrayed your people. You are thinking it is a trap." "It is a trap," he said, his voice hard. "They want to put me in their uniform so they can point to me when the treaties are broken. They want to buy my silence." "Or," she said, walking over to the bed, "they are afraid, and they are finally trying to do the right thing. You said it yourself, Chayton. You sold yourself once. The difference is, this time, You get to choose. You were their tool then. Now, they are offering you the power. You would not be their agent. You would be your people's. He stared at her, the truth of her words hitting him. It was a different world than it had been 2 weeks ago. The old, corrupt system was broken. Pike was gone. Kane was gone. There was a vacuum, and she was right. He could be the one to fill it, not as a traitor, but as a leader. "What about you?" he asked, his voice rough, changing the subject, needing to know. "The judge, he set you free. You can go home, back to Boston." She smiled, that small, soft smile that he was beginning to live for. She looked out the window, at the vast turquoise sky, at the red, distant mountains. "Home," she said. "That was never my home. That was my father's house. This is the first place I have ever felt free." She looked back at him, her eyes clear and steady. "I am not going anywhere. I have a school to build." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "I told you, I already made my choice. That night on the mesa, when I was so afraid I could not breathe, and you put mud on my face." He was silent. He was a man who had been running his entire life, running from the white world, running from his dying guilt, running from himself, and now, this woman, who had run farther than any of them, was choosing to stand still. She was choosing to build. Days later, Dr. Thorne finally gave him permission. Chayton stood, his body unsteady, his muscles weak. But he stood. He dressed himself, slowly, painfully, in the simple cotton shirt and trousers Nora had bought for him in the market. He waved off her help. He had to do this himself. He walked out of the room, his hand on the adobe wall for support. He walked through the dark, cool house. He pushed open the heavy wooden front door and stepped out into the courtyard. The sunlight hit him. It was bright, hot, and felt impossibly good. He stood in the middle of the dusty yard, his head tilted back, and he just breathed. He breathed in the clean, dry air. He breathed in the smell of hot dust, of chili roasting, of life. He was weak. He was scarred. He would probably never draw a bow with his left arm again. But he was alive. He looked at the plaza, at the white soldiers, the Mexican women selling fruit, the silent dine men wrapped in blankets. He was not one of them. He was not any of them. He was all of them. He realized, standing there in the sun, that for the first time in his life, he was not running. He was not a traitor. He was not a victim. He was not hiding, and he was not fleeing. He was standing in the exact middle of his two worlds, and he was, finally, home. A year passed. The seasons turned, marked by the dry, hot wind of summer and the sharp, clean snow of winter. The land endured, as it always did, but it had changed. The railroad, that great iron spine of the new world, had been forced to bend. The federal investigation, fueled by Nora's testimony and the damning evidence of Kane's own ledger, had halted its construction for 6 months. When it resumed, under new ownership, the charter was rewritten. The line was moved. It now ran a respectful 10 miles south of the sacred canyon, bypassing the graves of the ancestors. Where the railroad crossed the high plain, a new town had grown. It was not a violent, raw place like Las Calaveras. It was a depot, a crossing, built of adobe and piñon pine, not of false fronts and canvas. It was a place of trade, of substance. They called it Mesa Crossing. In the doorway of a low, sturdy building, Nora Greyhawk stood watching the sun begin to set. The building was a schoolhouse, and it was also her home. She was no longer Eleanor Ward, the pale ghost of Boston, nor Leo Morales, the desperate boy thief. She was herself, grounded in the red earth. From inside, she could hear the sounds of children packing their slates. She had 12 students. There was little Tomas, who had come from Las Calaveras to be her assistant. his quick mind soaking up every book she gave him. There were 4 Diné children who rode in every morning from the valley, sent by Lena. There were 5 Mexican children whose families worked the depot, and there were 2 white children, the sons of the new railroad foreman. She was teaching them to read. She used a worn Bible, a geography book, and the copied pages of the United States Constitution in the afternoons. Lena, who now lived with them, would teach the Dine stories, and the children would teach her their own. They were learning to read contracts. They were learning to read the world. Nora heard the steady hoofbeats of a single horse and smiled. Chayton rode up, dismounting his buckskin. The haunted, hunted look that had lived behind his eyes was gone. He was broader now, his body healed, though his left shoulder would always be stiff, a roadmap of scars that pained him in the cold. He moved with a new weight, a new authority. He had taken the job, but he had refused the title of Indian agent. He was, by federal decree, the official liaison to the Dine Nation. He was not a spy for the army. He was not a policeman for the government. He was a bridge. He held his meetings here, in his own home, or in the high canyons, on his own terms. The colonels and the politicians, for the first time, were coming to him. They were, at last, listening. "Lena is waiting," he said, his voice quiet. He took her hand. They rode east, toward the sacred canyon. The air was cool and clear. At the head of the trail, where Pike's men had once planned their ambush, a new sign stood. It was a thick slab of weathered wood, carved by one of the Dine elders. Nora had written the words, and Lena had translated them. In clear, black letters, the English read, "This land remembers those who came before. Walk softly." Beneath it, the flowing, symbolic shapes of the Dine language said the same. It was not a warning. It was a request, a boundary of respect. That evening, they did not stop at the canyon. They kept riding, climbing the familiar, rocky path up the great mesa, the same mesa where they had hidden from the posse, where they had cowered from the storm. Now, the sky was a perfect, cloudless bowl of pale blue, beginning to bruise with purple at the edges. The wind was a gentle breath, cool and sweet. The air was at peace. They dismounted at the summit and walked to the edge, looking out over the vast, painted desert. The world was awash in crimson and gold. The small cave that had been their refuge was a dark, quiet shadow below them. "It feels like a different lifetime," Nora said, her voice soft. She leaned her head against his good shoulder. "I have never been so afraid." That night, the lightning. "You were afraid," he agreed, his voice a low rumble. "And you were brave. I saw it." He reached into the pocket of his shirt. He pulled out a bracelet. It was heavy, solid silver, hammered flat, and set with 3 stones of pure, blue turquoise. It was Dine work, simple and beautiful. "Lena and the silversmith from her valley," he said. "They made this for you." He took her left hand and slid the heavy, cool silver onto her wrist. It settled as if it had always belonged there. "It is not a chain," he said, his voice rough, his thumb brushing the center stone. "It is not a mark of ownership. It is not what he wanted to put on you. It is a reminder. So you remember this place. So you remember the night you chose your own freedom." Nora looked at the bracelet, her eyes shining in the dying light. She smiled, a slow, soft smile that was just for him. She said nothing. Instead, she took his hand, his scarred, warm hand, and placed it flat against her stomach, just below her waist. He froze. His breath caught. His eyes, wide and searching, flew from her face down to his hand. He could feel it, a subtle, new firmness, a gentle, round curve that had not been there before. A new life. He looked back at her, his dark eyes filled with a sudden, profound awe, a wonder that left him speechless. "If it is a boy," Nora whispered, her hand covering his, "Lena has chosen a name. Yot-I. It means he walks between worlds. He will belong to both. And if it is a girl? Chayton managed to ask, his voice thick. If it is a girl, Nora said, her eyes meeting his, I want to call her Hope. He pulled her to him, his good arm wrapping around her waist, his other, stiffer arm coming up to hold her head against his chest. He held her and his child, as if they were the only sacred things in the world. He was shaking. They stood in the vast, quiet twilight, watching the last sliver of the sun melt behind the western mountains. We will have to tell them, Chayton said quietly, his lips against her hair. Him or her. We will have to tell them the truth. The truth. About the cost, he said. About my mother. About the long walk. About the men Kane buried in the tunnel. About the fight at the bridge. We cannot hide it. We cannot give them pretty lies. They have to know. They have to know what this peace costs. What this land costs. Yes, Nora said, her voice firm, muffled against his shirt. We will tell them. We will tell them all of it, so they know the price of freedom. He tilted her chin up, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, clinging kiss of the storm. It was not the hesitant, fearful kiss by the stream. It was a kiss of absolute peace, slow and deep and sure. It was the kiss of a man who was no longer haunted, and a woman who was no longer afraid. As the first stars pricked the deep, velvet sky, two sounds rose from the valley below. From the north, from the hidden Dine sanctuary, came the faint, steady rhythm of a drum, a ceremonial beat, a song of healing, of homecoming. And from the south, far distant, came the long, lonely wail of the train whistle, the sound of the new world, moving through the dark. The two sounds did not fight. They did not clash. They simply existed together, separate but equal, under the same vast and hopeful sky. They mounted their horses and rode slowly, side by side, down the darkening trail. Chayton reached across the space between them, and Nora took his hand. Their shadows, cast by the rising moon, stretched long on the red sand. Two figures merged into one. She had never needed anyone to save her, but here in the wind-blown west, it was she who had saved a warrior from his own ghosts. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am so curious to know where in the world you are hearing this right now. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And let us connect. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like, and maybe even hit that hype button to help this story be heard by more folks.